Mostly, I made spaghetti with some tomatoes, not tomato sauce, tomatoes. I picked them out of the yard, I cut the spices all up myself, cooked them all down with the sausage. That was some pretty good. I make a pasta fish too. I like that.
2 hours later,
I did work. My husband just fine. Apparently not gonna happen.
Indecisiveness. We got
Thank you.
Got better, but in the beginning
I trucked in 7 cubic yards.
Well, it's 5:30, so we'll call the meeting to order.
These raised beds.
And the first thing on the agenda tonight, I'd like to welcome everybody before we start. Thank those of you who come down here tonight to participate in the program, and those of you who are on the sidelines who are listening and wish to speak, we'll get to you in just a moment. I really appreciate the community support. This is how the commission works, and we really enjoy having people from the community come out and give us their opinion. So thank you. We'll start off with the first thing on the agenda. We'll have Carter go over the material in the agenda.
On page 2 of the agenda packet is a memo that goes through the agenda with some notes that I use for my benefit, and you can also use it for yours. Civilian Review Board is going to review a case, and they're going to give a preview at the beginning of what the rules are for what they do, how they do their review, and then there'll be an opportunity for the Commission and the CRB to discuss that review process. And we'll have a break, and there'll be a homelessness perspectives panel. 5 members of the community who've been invited to talk about their firsthand experience in dealing with police and homelessness. The Police Commission is going to review a policy on civil disputes. Originally, there was intended to be a review of the videotaping of events policy, but the Commission had asked for that to have a review by the city attorney, and because of other things that took them away from reviewing EPD policy, the review did not get done, so you all didn't have something to look at with the attorney's review. Also included in your packet is the chief's presentation, because at the joint meeting, there's not enough time to have him do a verbal presentation, but you've got the written, and you can ask questions either in the meeting or send them in by email. Also in the packet is a memo from the committee that reviewed applications for the vacancy for the Police Commission, and if there is no conversation or motion to the contrary, that memo would be forwarded on to the mayor for her consideration. And minutes from both the Police Commission and the CRB are not in this packet and will be picked up at subsequent meetings.
Thank you. Any questions about the agenda or materials? Okay, we'll move on to public comment. If you have filled out a sheet, we only have one so far. If anyone else wishes to make some comments, late arrivals, you will help yourself to a blue sheet over there on the front table and fill it out and hand it up here, and we will get you on the program. And I'll turn it over to Vice Chair Karen.
I have one speaker currently signed up to speak, Deb Frisch. Oh, great. I was like, where are we going to put her? Okay, right here. You know the rules, so I'll go over them. Thank you, Deb.
In the past 7 years, I have conducted an investigation of the Lane County law enforcement system, including the Lane County District Attorney's Office, Lane County Circuit Court, United States District Court, Lane County Sheriff's Office, and the Eugene Police Department. The investigation has included objective data such as descriptions of events in the Register Guard, public records requests, or information obtained at public meetings such as this one. The investigation has also included subjective data, such as my own personal experiences with all 5 of the jurisdictions I just listed. From my perspective, the healthiest organization is the Lane County Sheriff's Office, with the Eugene Police Department a close second. I think that my positive opinion of the Eugene Police Department is due in large part to the existence of the Eugene Police Commission. The Eugene Police Commission is charged with the task of incorporating community values into EPD-related policy. That's very valuable to me. It's also very inexpensive, just 30% of the police analyst's salary. While I am a huge fan of the Eugene Police Commission, I am very, very, very skeptical about the cost effectiveness of the Civilian Review Board and police auditor. I am almost 100% sure that the $400,000 spent on the police auditor and Civilian Review Board every year would be much, much better spent elsewhere, such as keeping the libraries open as much as possible. I don't have time to elaborate on my reasons why I think the Civilian Review Board and police auditor are among the least cost-effective expenditures in the City of Eugene budget, but I'm sure I'll write a letter to all of you all one of these days about that. I have one more quick point about the homelessness discussion you'll have tonight. There are 2 types of policies the Eugene Police Commission is responsible for. First, there are chapters in the POM, such as use of force. Second, there are sections of the Eugene City Code that affect the police department, such as the social host ordinance and prohibited camping. While the Police Commission has historically focused on evaluating chapters in the POM, it would be very useful to shift focus to sections of the Eugene City Code that should be re-examined. I've already mentioned one, the ill-conceived ordinance that created the police auditor and the Civilian Review Board. Here's another, the City of Eugene's ordinance on prohibited camping. I think that the city ordinance regarding camping on public property needs to be changed. There should be one site designated for legal camping, maybe 111 North Garfield or the Train Song site, but also the City of Eugene should strengthen the sanctions for camping illegally elsewhere. Maybe arrest people instead of just giving them a citation, maybe no 24-hour notice. Anyway, I hope that your months-long examination of the homelessness problem in Eugene leads you to make concrete recommendations to the City Council regarding specific sections of the Eugene City Code. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no other speakers wishing to sign up, that concludes our public forum. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you. And our next item on the agenda is comments from the board commission members. So tonight we'll go all the way around the table. We'll start with Joe. Welcome back, Joe.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I just, those of you who don't know, I just spent 3 months pedaling a bicycle from Canada down to Mexico. And I did, I did want to make one comment on Deb's, what Deb said. I think there does need to be a place where people can exist. The problem is the large number of people who need that facility, which is probably somewhere in the range of 10,000 people in the greater Eugene, Springfield area. That would be roughly the number of homeless that there are out there. So a single site is probably not going to do it, but we certainly could save an enormous amount of resources on the part of the police by actually having a site like that and getting it to operate reasonably well. Thank you.
I have no comment.
Nor do I, but happy to be here.
I'm looking forward to this next year, working on policies and making recommendations that are reflective of our community. Thanks.
Deb might be surprised here, but I'm still on. Okay. But I did want to thank you for your letter that you did send that we received, I believe, in our packet last week. While I don't agree with everything that you had to say, or that was said in there, including the part about, I do believe there is a need for the CRB and the internal auditors. I think that's a very important piece. Maybe I'm a little biased because I was an internal auditor, but so I do see the value for it, and I think that it is needed. But I think a lot of the other comments that she made did have some value and are at least worth looking into, so I wanted to thank her for submitting that. And welcome back, everybody, and it's good to see everybody after a couple months. And a slimmed down Joe is, we lost half a Joe, I think. And welcome to the CRB. Thank you for being here, and for our guests for tonight, and all the public here. Thank you.
I got to go on a tour of Opportunity Village in the Train Song neighborhood last night. They kind of got up and going without a whole lot of publicity, but they got this rolling start going on. It's a beautiful site. We live out in that neighborhood, and it's nice to have a 24-hour staffed area along a stretch of road that used to be kind of iffy. I guess having an open house on October 5th, and I just encourage taking a look at the site. They're doing good things out there.
Well, first, I'd like to thank the presenter that made comments today. Very complex issues, no easy answers. And welcome back to the commissioners that have been traveling around the country and stuff on bicycle and other steam-powered energy sources. And I also want to thank and welcome the CRB to the meeting tonight. You know, I'm looking forward to learning more from them. They're always have some very interesting background as they review the cases and stuff, and I think that we're all going to learn something from it. I'd like to welcome Commissioner Pat Farr. Thank you for coming in, sitting in, and all the other visitors and guests, welcome.
Thank you. And Tony, you might take a chance to introduce yourself since this is your first meeting.
Yes.
Thank you.
So my name's Tony. I'm currently the chair of the Human Rights Commission, and I am Linda's backup, and she's no longer on the commission, so I am here in her place. We are in transition now to see who will actually be fully appointed as your guys' liaison, but until then I will be attending your meetings and keeping the Human Rights Commission informed.
Two quick things. One of them, first and foremost, my apologies for being late. And then secondly, thank you, the Police Commission, for having us tonight. Appreciate it.
Probably just share your comment. Thanks for allowing the CRB to start this process.
Hi guys, my name is Chris Wig. This is my second Civilian Review Board meeting and the first time that I've met many of you, and I just wanted to thank you for having me and the rest of fellow Civilian Review Board members at your meeting.
I don't have any comments.
Oh, that's me.
Carter, thank you for putting the packets together and welcoming us here tonight.
No.
Councilor Surratt is not going to be here tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
I wanted to welcome the CRB for being here in our annual joint meeting. I'm looking forward to hearing more about your review process and maybe seeing part of it in action. Thanks.
Thank you. Welcome everybody back from the summer break. And glad to have everybody back here in one piece and healthy. So far, that's the goal. Okay. And at this point, I guess we'll move to the next item on the agenda. We'll turn this over to Steve McIntyre with the Civilian Review Board Chair and let you carry your agenda forward from here, Steve. Thank you.
All right, thank you, appreciate it. I think before we jump in the case, I'd like to have Mark maybe share a little bit about the process.
I know some of you are new, and so for a few minutes or two, I wanted to kind of discuss what we do in terms of cases and how our office operates. We were created, one of the things we do, the primary things we do is intake complaints from citizens, members of the community, and anyone else who happens to have contact with a Eugene police employee and feels as if there was some difficulty or some question or some query about that particular contact. At times, we also deal with particular policy issues. Once that comes into our office, then by ordinance, the police auditor classifies the issue as either an allegation of serious misconduct, or a service complaint, or a policy complaint, or an inquiry. By the sound of it, allegation of serious misconduct, without going into each particular allegation, it speaks for itself. A service complaint is typically an issue about officers didn't come to my house in time, that they drive poorly, that I expected a different level of service, or something along many different categories. Policy complaint, for example, might be why are downtown bike officers allowed to ride their bikes on the sidewalks when other people aren't allowed to ride their bikes on the sidewalks? Those kind of things. We do about 2 or 3 of those a year. And an inquiry typically is something that I need more information before I decide if it fits into one of the other 3 categories. Sometimes I get enough information where I see that it doesn't fit into any of those particular categories, and we still get a report from the police. Historically, we've had about 360 complaints a year. This year, I suspect we will be higher than that because we've had about 100 in the last 2 months. And, but somewhat manageable, I suppose. But it's been difficult, and read the newspapers, we've had a number of very difficult and complex issues as well to solve. What happens then with the review board is there's 2 primary things we do. We talk about a lot of things, but the primary things we do is some level of training on a monthly or bi-monthly basis in which folks learn about different parts of the community or different things that officers do. And it varies from someone talking about what the K-9 team does versus going to Buckley House and seeing the functions and responsibilities of Buckley House and the connection between the police department and some of the other community services that exist. And then what often occurs is case reviews. Now, what we do every month is much like what you get is summaries of cases that are open and closed. Oregon public records law doesn't allow us to name names by ordinance. We're not allowed to talk about discipline. So we try to get information out there within the restrictions of Oregon's public record law. And coming from a state that has a different public records law, we try to balance the interests of what the public needs to know and meeting the requirements of the law. For the review board, they are entitled to the entire investigative file. So during the course of an investigation, Internal Affairs does the investigations. Lee and I monitor the investigation. We can ask questions in the investigation. As you can appreciate, about every 2 years, there's turnover in Internal Affairs. So I think there is a bit of a blessing that out of my 30-plus years career in public service, I've done this about 20-some years. And so we're trying from an administrative standpoint to find out what happened and whether someone violated police policy. In terms of criminal investigations, I'm kept informed to a degree, certainly to a degree far greater than I expected, quite honestly. I'm kept well informed, quite honestly, in criminal cases, but I don't get to interview people, I don't talk to people. It's still a police investigation, whether EPD does it or oftentimes Oregon State Police. In terms of the administrative process, once we get a complaint that comes in, it sort of, it flips from, unfortunately, and it's the way the process works, and it's a process that's endorsed by academia, by the Department of Justice. The model we have is one of the most favored in the nation. It flips to an administrative process. Sometimes people come in and they think that we're going to be their advocates. If places like the ACLU or the Public Defender's Office or the courts or those places, if those aren't providing those advocacy services as they're designed to provide, there is that expectation that we provide those services. We don't provide those services. We have to be neutral because at the end of the day, for lack of better terminology, but one that I think is easiest to understand, is that we're administrative, and the review board are administrative tribunals, if you will, in terms of employment issues. So we have to approach those things from an administrative standpoint. Once the investigation's completed and internal affairs does, I don't know where we'll be. We varied from about 40 to 60 allegations, which consumed a considerable amount of time, as Mr. Rhodey has pointed out on numerous occasions for us. The businessman still trying to wrap his arms around it from a private sector business standpoint, wrap his arms around the cost. Then the chief makes final disciplinary decisions. I make a recommendation, the chain of command makes the recommendations. At the end of the process, the chief gets all the recommendations, and then he makes his decision about whether the officer committed wrongdoing or violated policy, and what the discipline would be. We have, by statute, we have no involvement in the disciplinary process. At the conclusion of that particular process, then I typically meet with the chair and the vice chair, so we can decide, or even the board has suggestions about what kind of cases they want to review. They review about 10 a year, we try to talk about cases that have variety. In other words, we're not going to look at 10 force cases. For example, we're going to look at a case today that involves to some degree, the property room. And then we'll look at a search and seizure or two, or an allegation of racial disparities. So we try to have that variety in terms of what cases they might look at. And then also, we try to have cases that are, for lack of a better term, I guess, easy to decide. Cases in which there is a lot of discussion and there are different perspectives on a particular issue, because it's not, some of these cases aren't simple. Some of these cases are very simple. Many of them are complex and have a lot of different variables, so we have that particular discussion. At the end of that, we oftentimes get policy and investigative assistance from the folks in the police department who are involved in the investigation or involved in policy. Then they make a decision on whether they agree with what my recommended adjudication was, what the chief's recommended decision was, what the supervisor's recommended adjudications, and then we talk about whether or not there's any policy implications here. In addition, separately, I also work with the policy analyst when I think that there are weaknesses in the policy or improvements in the policy, and I provide that commentary and my recommendations to them. And I feel, and when I do, I feel like I'm on solid ground. It's what I do, so I check around the country when I see things, and so if I see a policy that, for example, DOJ says this is a great policy, and it might be in Austin, Texas, or it might be in Miami, Florida, and if I think that, for example, canine policy, if I see a canine policy that during a consent decree process that DOJ says this is a great canine policy, I will push that to our policy people to say, look, we've got the good housekeeping seal of approval here. There might be considerations, and every jurisdiction is different, of course, but I think that we've been able to make a lot of adjustments and clarification for policy, because I view the policy manual for officers like a college textbook. If you don't keep up with your college textbook, you're not going to do very well, and so you have a responsibility to keep up with your textbook. Leadership also has the responsibility to make sure that textbook stays current with laws, and again, and that's where you guys also come in, and you're also being liaisons to the community in terms of what's of value to the community in terms of policies and the things that are important. I know the less than 10 things that are of great value to federal courts and federal judges and agencies, and so I try to focus on those. I think y'all got like about 8 pages on diplomatic immunities, and I still haven't seen one embassy open yet in Eugene, so I don't really worry about that one. But I do express my opinions about things like search and seizure and use of force and those kinds of things. So, and the review board as well, if they feel some weaknesses, or if they feel that it's not given the kind of guidance that the officers ought to have when they're out there, and what the expectations are for learning that. So once all those things are talked about and discussed, and sometimes it's a fairly brief discussion, and sometimes it's a fairly long discussion. But I must say, I have a great group of people who make tough decisions about people's livelihoods, and whose decisions have impact on those who are affected by the decisions. And I would say that our sustained rate is one of the highest in the nation in terms of when we say that there was a policy violated here. And it's also not always about just individuals. We want to make sure that the big picture is addressed with the leadership and understanding where they're coming from and what their decisions are and why those decisions are important to them. And to ensure that training, another issue, is consistent with what is important from an employee safety standpoint, from a public safety standpoint, from a risk minimization standpoint, and from a community relations standpoint, and not in any particular order. All those standards are things also that they consider. So that's my brief little synopsis, because our chair assigned it to me. Does that satisfy you, Mr. Chair?
It does, except for the brief part. Thank you. As far as mechanics go, what we'll do is we'll kind of queue up the case, give an overview, and then we have another number of discussion items that we'll go through, beginning with how it was the intake and classification, the investigation and monitoring, department policies and practices that may be implicated, training considerations, and then whether we agree with the adjudication or not, and then any other additional concerns. So with that, Leah, are you going to cue that up?
Yes, I am.
Brenda?
Before we get started, I just want to let the CRB members know that Police Commission videotapes their meetings, and so they get posted. It's a policy that we are not allowed to talk about the officers, the witnesses, or anyone that's interviewed in the file. So I just ask that everybody remember not to use names today. Just to also give you an idea that we have CRB protocols, and Leah will be putting that up after she talks about things. One of the things is we aren't allowed to have public comment on the case that we're reviewing. So that means that as we're discussing it afterwards, you guys can't ask us questions about the particular case or the episode. You can ask us about the policy or the protocols and how we reach our decisions, or how we make the discussions, or how we come to the decisions. But fact-specific cases, I don't think we can ask those questions. I think does that cover the other things that we need to cover before we got started?
So
Okay.
all of our warning and disclosures out.
Okay.
And I don't know that I actually included the CRB protocols. I'm pretty sure I didn't, so
Okay,
thank
well,
you for that.
we have an extra sheet.
Okay. And then what did you want to do?
Talk about the case. It may be hard to read because of the lighting, and because I changed some of the verbiage. We had someone who worked at the thank you. That property control offices who contacted a detective regarding a motorcycle and associated with the detective's case. The property control specialist was attempting to locate the paperwork and the motorcycle. The detective informed her that the motorcycle was being stored at an employee's house and the boat was in a storage facility. When the property control specialist notified other supervisors of the situation, a supervisor checked the paperwork and found that reports stated that the boat had been transferred to a vehicle broker, and someone correct me if I'm not using the correct terminology, a vehicle broker, not the city's contracted broker / auction house. I didn't hear anything contrary to that, so I must have used the right verbiage. For later sale, and if the motorcycle was still held at EPD property control. The supervisor was able to locate emails indicating that the involved employee planned on taking the boat and motorcycle to be detailed and taken to private dealers in hopes of obtaining a higher price so that the funds would go to the victim's restitution fund. Supervisor notified her chain of command and informed the auditor's office of the situation. Supervisor also contacted the involved employee who procured the property to direct him to return the boat and motorcycle to property control immediately. The involved employee advised that the boat was currently being stored in the city shop's garage. The involved employee ultimately brought the motorcycle back to property control on the day that he was contacted by his supervisor. He stated that the motorcycle had sustained damage while it was stored there, and he was concerned that the damage resulted in them losing value, reducing the amount that would go to the victim's fund. We had an employee who was dissatisfied about the current storage situation of the motorcycle and the boat. That weather was causing depreciation of the two items. He also expressed dissatisfaction with the city's contracted broker/auctioneer and opined that the storage process for the boat and motorcycle caused deterioration of the values of the boat and motorcycle. The employee took it upon himself and informed subordinates that he was going to take the boat and the motorcycle home, polish them back up, fix them, get them in operating condition so that they would have more value when they were sold at auction. And the involved employee charged city time for repairing and transporting the property, again without knowledge of his supervisors. I classified it as an allegation of misconduct, and it was forwarded to Internal Affairs for investigation. The allegations that we determined were most appropriate for this, and there was oftentimes a discussion with senior management as well in terms of what policy best fit the particular incidents that involved, and we determined that involved employee A removed an impound boat and motorcycle from EPD's impound lot to maintain and store these items at his residence without supervisor authorization. The involved employee A judgment that involved employee A removed an impounded boat and motorcycle from the impound lot to maintain and store them at his residence without our authorization, and that he should have known that this was not authorized or acceptable behavior. The investigation showed that the involved employee removed an impounded boat and motorcycle from EPD's impound lot to maintain and store those items at his residence without supervisor investigation. In terms of once IA does the investigation, it is given to the immediate supervisor of the employee. That supervisor writes a recommendation for adjudication or decision on whether the officer violated policy or not, consults with me, we have a discussion and decide whether or not we agree or disagree. Typically, or not typically, I may also write an adjudication recommendation. I'm not required to, I may. And then those recommendations are passed on to the police chief. And I may just agree with the supervisor if I believe that the recommendation is reasonable. And in this case, as you can see, everyone in the chain of command in my office, prior to the chief's final review of the case and final decision, determined that the officer violated policy in both instances. So now what happens is, in terms of the ordinance and the CRB policy, is they follow a path and decide whether each of these categories are relevant. Do you want me to keep going, or are you going to?
Nope, you want to got it. Thank you. Appreciate it. So the first topic for discussion is complaint intake and classification. How do everybody feel about this? Agree with concerns? Other?
I think
question was, when they talked about the judgment, whether there was one particular point that we're talking about as far as there being a judgment. Are we talking about the property leaving the facility, or some of the things that transpired as we went further, or is it just the whole thing? I'm also wondering if we have questions tonight, who from the department will address those?
It would be probably Sergeant Lindsay in terms of that investigation.
Okay, so we can sit at the table?
Yeah.
You want to do it?
Sure.
Thank you.
For judgment, that's usually an overall
Okay.
type of thing instead of, okay, at hour 1, bad judgment, at hour 4, bad judgment, 2 days later, bad judgment.
So if-
Wraps it all into the whole decision-making process.
So we don't all have to necessarily agree on the same point that was poor judgment in this case?
That's correct.
Any other thoughts regarding classification? Complete investigation and monitoring.
Am I gonna be the only one talking?
No.
Okay, so
I thought the
Okay.
investigation was very, very thorough. I was really amazed on how many people they interviewed, and I thought the interviews were very, very, very thorough. I was give it 2 thumbs up on the investigation.
I was curious about, as part of the investigation, it seemed to me that an integrity issue kind of surfaced. And I'm looking at the General Order 1101.1, 16 specifically, that talks about dishonesty or placing yourself in a position which might compromise your integrity and that of your fellow employees or the department. And I'm curious, I know we've discussed a while back, but when something like that comes up, it's not been classified, it's not part of the initial issues that surface. How do we handle that when we discover something in the investigation process that doesn't get addressed?
I'm not sure where you were at in the process where you didn't think that was addressed. I can tell you in discussions about how to classify it, anyone who was involved in it, correct me if I'm wrong,
I'll just say
his subordinates were very aware of what was going on, and haven't been in government service a long time. I can appreciate the frustrations people sometimes have that they have to follow a process, but in terms of rising to the level of an allegation of dishonesty or integrity, which oftentimes, quite honestly, may cost, or is likely to cost a person their job, because you have, there's a ripple effect in terms of future prosecutions that this person is involved in. We didn't quite get there on this one.
Well, a couple of things. I think that it was pretty clear in terms of describing private storage rather than just being direct about it was his house. And the email that he initially said he shared with his employees, and then said, no, I actually spoke to them, and the email said something different. And to me, that kind of leads to, and as part of this process that was uncovered in the investigation, some questions about placing yourself in a position where there's an integrity issue. And I think that's right on point in that section 16. And my question was actually, just humor me and say that you found some of those concerns. What do you then do with them if you uncover them as part of the investigation?
We've added, during the investigation process, we've added, on other cases, we've added allegations, and then with the contract, with the union contract, and this person is non-union, they are given the opportunity to re-explain themselves, and you'll actually have a case in a few months where you'll see that sort of process. Short answer, we do have the opportunity to add allegations.
For me, when I'm doing the investigation, if I recognize it's going down another road, it's a whole other allegation, I can either add it myself, I can bring it to the auditor's office attention, we can discuss about if there's going to be a new allegation added. And anywhere after I finish my investigation, if it's passed on to supervision, if they feel like there's another area that we need to go, they can add it at that level as well. So.
Okay, thank you, that's what I wanted to know.
I thought about integrity too when I was read through the whole file and then went through the different charges, and and I caught that, and ultimately every piece of evidence in this case that we've been presented with, every person who had the chance to testify said that the officer in question, they did not believe that he was doing this for personal gain or enrichment, and that I think is the standard for me. I mean, for me as someone who's reviewing this impartially, that there would be an integrity issue if he was going to benefit from this. But since, I mean, it seems that he did want to get more money for the victim's restitution fund, and that was, judgment, yes, integrity, yeah, and he still seems like has some integrity.
I believe reasonable people can differ, but I think when you make one representation and it's actually something else, regardless of whether you benefit from it or not, that might call into question, or at least the appearance that maybe there's an issue there.
I don't disagree that it was, it was a close call.
Yeah.
It was a close call.
Sure.
Are we moving on from the investigation quality to the next?
I just wanted to make a comment, if I might, George, before we move on. I really appreciated the volume of emails that accompanied this. It really helped paint that picture that we're talking about, what was the intent. I think that you couldn't help but begin to question what was the intent of this officer and his behaviors. And so that going back to a number of years ago, 2009, and moving forward in the volume of emails, although sometimes you're like, okay, this is overkill, but it was really helped to paint the picture of this circumstance. So again, that was along those lines. That was very helpful.
I think the only thing that I found lacking in the report was when I was listening to the 4+ hours of interviews. When I got to, there was a discussion between yourself and the officer about the agency relationship. And I didn't see that documented in the discussion at all. Because, I mean, to me, that was really telling that it was like, that was the one place where he seemed to get what we were talking about, that, you can't, that you have a responsibility, that you have this property in trust for you, and the idea that nobody was really sure who, was the owner of it. And when you two had that agency discussion ever so briefly, it's like, I was like listening and went, oh, I didn't mean, and so I kept flipping through my folder. So I would have appreciated that being in here, because what I try to do is read everything and then go back and listen, because the tone that I get from hearing the people talk about it is sometimes even more telling than what you read. It's like there are often times where, I read it and I think, oh, this doesn't sound so bad, and then I hear the officer's explanation and he seems to have no, remorse for what he did or no understanding. And in this case, he seemed to get parts of it, but I understood his frustration more upon listening to him than I did upon reading it, and especially that agency part. So.
And if I may, from a process standpoint, for the police commission, there is an entire investigative file that's on a CD and can be voluminous. What typically happens is they get the investigative report. Our expectation is that they also review everything on the CD. In fact, they just had a discussion yesterday with an adjudicating supervisor, because it was clear to me that he or she did not go through the whole CD on a particular case, and therefore missed the key point. The burden that they have is they don't have, IA has, is they don't have transcribers, and they have to type these reports themselves. So there is that responsibility for our members, because we've had that discussion in the past about what's in the report and what's not in the report, and we always appreciate the additional helpful hints. And 7 people have 7 different views about what should be printed material, what shouldn't be printed material, so that's always a dynamic that we have to deal with. But the expectation remains that the entire volume of information on that CD is reviewed prior to the meeting.
Sorry, I do have one thing. And I'm not sure this fits in here, but some of this discussion is going to be about the value of these commodities that the officer in question removed, were there other similar valuable commodities in storage? And I was trying to get, I was wondering about that as I was reading. Are there other motorcycles that weren't a Harley? Was there, I was wondering that because it sounded like, one of the rationales is it was overcrowded and there wasn't a good place. So I was curious about that. That would have been helpful for me to know and continue to understand the decisions.
As far as the property goes, that boat, the particular boat involved, it was a very nice boat, very few hours, had a significant value to it. It was being stored on an outside property. At that property, generally we have vehicles. I don't believe there's any other boats there at the time, so it's just not the right facility for it.
Yeah.
As far as the motorcycle, there's several other motorcycles being held there at the same location. The officer's stated intent in taking it to his residence was to increase the value of it so that when they sold it, they could get more money for victim restitution out of it.
My guess is there aren't any other things at the property, at the lot, that fell into the category that this one fell into as to not really property, not really evidence, just kind of stuff we don't know what to do with sort of thing. Or we can't do something with it quite yet.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So these vehicles were going to be very soon cleared for auction. There's quite a process through the court before it can be cleared for that, and they were getting close to a point where it was going to be cleared for auction. Matter of fact, and I guess I don't remember specifically the timeline where the letter was signed that said that they could now give it to the location for sales. I don't believe anything else on the whole lot would have fallen in that same category.
Okay.
Plus the money, the proceeds from these two vehicles were to go directly to victim restitution. That's the only case I've ever heard of being exactly.
Okay, that's good.
So as we go towards the policies and practices, do they ever detail anything before taking it to auction? I mean, any of those other items? And my second question that kind of would go with that is, you have the seniors on patrol that clean the patrol cars. Is that something that could be a resource if an officer were trying to get more money for something that was in property and was going to the lot to be sold?
I think that definitely could be a resource. I don't know about the detailing. It wouldn't surprise me. I know we can take, if we do any maintenance on a vehicle that's in seizure and spend any money on it, we can recoup that money after the sale of it before the money was saved in restitution. So if we spend $400 on detail on it, we can pull that money back to the department, and the rest of the money goes to where it goes.
That was spoke to in this matter. They could have had a detail and would have just reduced the amount that went to the fund.
Right, well, they talked about it, but I just didn't know if that was something that actually happens or has happened in other cases, or were they doing it just in this case because of where the funds were going to go to?
George, we are on to Department of Policies and Practice.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we were on task. I don't have any comment there. I just wanted to.
Most of my comments are in this area. I was really curious. I thought in this General Order 6012, where it talks about property versus evidence, I saw, like in the beginning of the section where it clearly says property or evidence, and I think property would cover this. But then on page 4 of that, section 2, it says if you check evidence out to your custody and then transfer, it doesn't speak to evidence and property. And in the, like maybe the recommendations, perhaps that ought to be clarified to speak to property so that we remove any ambiguity. That was an observation there. But also, I was curious to know more about this swapping out time and then getting paid overtime to return, demanding overtime to return something. And 3 hours, by the way, to return something.
It's a minimum, I think, isn't it? Usually overtime is like,
If
they show up.
Overtime's a minimum. If somebody gets called in off on overtime, it's a minimum 3 hour callback. If it's on the weekend, that's a 4 hour callback.
So like if they get called into grand jury and they come testify for 15 minutes, they automatically get.
So there were two policies and practices I kind of wanted to understand a little better. One was about the swap out and the overtime as it relates to this matter, and then calling on witnesses, that as part of this investigation. I thought that seemed kind of strange, but what is the policy regarding both of those issues?
Policy regarding?
Okay, the first one is about swapping out time to detail and then the overtime to return something that shouldn't have been in his home in the first place. And then the second issue was calling on witnesses when there's an active investigation. He made phone calls and contacts.
That's three. Let's
Two
start
were
with exchange time.
So as far as bringing the vehicle back, having a employee work on hours that are designated time off, we have to do that. We do have interest. Even though we may not agree with the circumstances of how it occurred, it's still, he's being called in to work on his days off, and so we're required to do that.
He called himself in.
He was actually told by his supervisor to bring the vehicle back.
The overtime for returning, but the detailing and the work he did.
By his statement, the detailing work that he did on it was exchanged on a one-to-one basis. The hours that he spent working on the vehicles at home was then taken as individual hours off of work. That is allowed. I don't know if it's in policy per se, but it's an acceptable practice.
How does it get approved? Does he have to say, I'm at my house detailing property that was taken in civil?
He never, no, he did not get it approved.
And is that, as I think your point,
as a supervisor, I don't know that there would be an expectation to every last hour that he spent to have it approved before he worked.
At least the concept behind what you're doing for exchange time? I mean, the concept behind what you're doing, I mean, because the example was given, if you're in the middle of typing a report and your 8 hours is done and you continue to type the report for another hour, so instead of doing overtime, you do it as exchange time. That makes sense that the supervisor doesn't have to say that's an appropriate use of exchange time. But I can think of other things, including detailing or working on a motorcycle, that you would think a supervisor would be involved in the idea behind that's okay for exchange time or not okay for exchange time. Does that make sense?
Yes. I went into quite a bit of detail in how he logged it and that because it looked funky to me. I wanted to make sure it added up. I didn't see anything that led me to believe that there was an allegation of misconduct, that he was asking for more hours than what he worked. And that's kind of where I left it.
Well, it seems to fall under the issue of judgment because, as Chief Kearns did a good job in his letter noting that that's not the best judgment as a supervisor to be taking your time to be doing something that's probably not what he should be being paid to do. That's not within his scope of position.
There's little in this that assures the public that he was a great steward of public dollars.
I didn't see anything in this about job description. Quite definitely, an employee went well outside of his job description to have a high-paid person doing a detail. Just for checking, I called a company that the city uses for the last 2 years to see what a boat would cost to detail. It's between $250 and $350. What's stopping if it's not in the job description? She has at the police station, and those plants needed to be trimmed out there. I'm going to charge overtime to do that. He so farly fell out. And by the way, I happen to know a lot about mechanical things. Just so happen that I do mechanics. And for him to start doing mechanics almost is an insult that, it's so easy to do. And I guess, and the job was not completed. So what upset me, there was not going to supervisors, but the biggest crime, which I don't think was mentioned here, was, I'm sure this employee had a job description, and in every case, this did not follow his job description to the least. So I think there was another they say poor judgment. I don't know when somebody goes out there outside of their job description totally and does, for instance, detailing. I know the detailer, they don't hire $45 an hour people to do detailing. And also they have the right equipment, they have the knowledge to do it correctly. So when this person was doing mechanical and detailing well outside of their profession is very, very, that goes over judgment. I mean, that is, and I don't think it was brought up anywhere in the report that does not follow in his job description.
Chief Karen's one.
Sure. You're making a very good point. There was a day many years ago, when someone might commit a violation like this, and then the classification of policy violations would include poor judgment, and then, well, he used poor judgment by doing work he shouldn't be doing during off-duty hours and charging it to his regular times. In other words, he's decided that he should be paid to do this thing he shouldn't be doing. So that's not just poor judgment, that means he coded that he was doing work, city work, and that is dishonest. That's not city work. So we'd also get him for truthfulness. And then we'd say, well, if he's coding something for work he shouldn't be doing, then he's falsifying his timesheet. So he's violated our timesheet policy. Well, it just gets absurd, The reality is that this is the way I view these things, and since I'm the one that adjudicates them and then decides on the discipline, I thought it might be helpful for you to know what my thinking is. So what we do now is we simplify the policy violations. There's no question that he violated the policy on how he managed property, and there's no question that he used poor judgment. And now, once I make that decision, then the next question is, how aggravated was the poor judgment? And the aggravating factors determine the degree of the discipline, not the number of the policy violations.
And I think that gets to my point that and I think what George is saying is, when we're talking about exchange time, I think since it's not a policy, I'm guessing it's just a practice. I don't know that there's any directive from the chief's office, but I would think, we would presume that if you're doing exchange time, even if it's somewhat flexible, it's still within the scope of what you are employed by EPD to do. Because, everybody started talking about liability in here, and I'm guessing that if you don't put a carburetor back on the correct way and somebody drives it off, something very bad could happen, and now the liability to the city goes even higher. So I'm just wondering if maybe there needs to be some kind of directive with regards to what exchange time, how it really works. Because I didn't see it in here anywhere that, other than people describing it, but there's nothing, it doesn't seem really set as to how much you could take, how much you can accumulate, and what sorts of things you can be doing and call it exchange time. I know that's to him, but I'm looking at you because that's what I'm supposed to do.
I can speak to that too, like, in that you've seen the FBI's policy manual. It's like this. It takes 10 binders to fit on the shelf. You go open it up and look at a policy and go, oh yeah, that's John Smith. He did that one thing once, and that created a policy that affects the whole department. So you see, this is, reviewing our cases is a fantastic opportunity for you to see the degree to which we examine our misconduct. But it's also like looking at the department through a straw. We don't have a concern with how exchange time is used. We see it used properly 99.9% of the time, and then we see these outrageous cases and we address them.
I wanted to circle back to the calling of witnesses. Is there a policy that prohibits contacting a witness in an active investigation?
I don't know if everybody gets the reference there. The involved officer talked to several other potentially involved officers about the investigation and kind of shared his feelings and opinion on the investigation. At the time, I did not give any direction to him at the onset of the investigation to not do that. I went through this investigation. It's the first time it happened to me, and that's part of what I do now. And I contact the involved officers as well. This is what I'm doing. Please don't talk with other involved officers regarding the investigation. So.
And even, honestly, and I would have to do the research. I'm not sure we can make it stick in it. Unless it was, we certainly would have, if it was a criminal case, I think we would certainly have more, well, just a stronger case could be made if you approached a victim after someone made a criminal allegation against a criminal allegation, but an administrative investigation, absent a current policy right now, that would be difficult to make stick.
It seems reasonable there would be an expectation that you wouldn't have those discussions, especially when you add in the complexity of supervisor or supervisee and how that might affect workplace relations. You know, I wouldn't think that you necessarily have to have a policy on it. It just seems reasonable to expect that to occur.
Final arbiters of these kinds of cases, their expectation would be that there was a policy. I'm certain of that.
So this is, Detective E made this point that there was not a logging when these, when the motorcycle came in of either the hours of the boat or the mileage on the motorcycle. And I didn't see any reference in here that that's an expectation. Has that changed? You know, it certainly would help the case of, you know, that this officer did not do anything for any personal gain. If we could say absolutely, you know, motorcycle came in with, you know, 8,000 miles and went out with 8,005 miles. Has there been an improvement? Is there? I know there was reference to an improved property handling policy, and I'm wondering if there's any reference to that.
I can't specifically say that the policy, my belief and memory of this one also in the investigation, but I know when we take vehicles, the miles go down.
Okay.
When I went and pulled the evidence property sheet and saw that there was no miles or hours on the road, it was a complete surprise to me because it just looked in how we do business. I can't specifically say that it's in policy, but I believe it is.
I'm pretty sure the report writing manual requires that we complete the form with the mileage.
And I have a little bit of concern that this supervisor didn't direct, you know, that this he didn't know it and they didn't know it, both that process. And I know that this boat came in many, many years ago and there's been some improvement since then, but that's been something.
I'm bothered with the word "not for personal gain." That is not truthful in my book, because when I can be paid to do something and then go do my hobby and charge for my hobby, there is personal gain, because I think the words were used, motorhead. That being a motorhead is a hobby, so I don't like the words for personal gain. I don't think there was no doubt for personal gain, because he was able to do hobby and get paid his value. So,
and we're in the policy and we're training considerations and no, that's right on point. You're right there. But I do think that perhaps this General Order 601-2, where it just kind of changes from property and or evidence to just evidence, should be my recommendation to look at it and make sure that it addresses both situations.
I think with regards to training, I'm sure there is something that talks about kind of the ethics and the honesty, and I found a couple of things interesting when they were talking with the friend that was going to, or the secondary party that was going to sell. You know, it was that, you know, he was very honest that he thought this officer think he used the word between the lines. And, you know, there was nothing shady going on, and officers that were talked to said, you know, I don't think he was being dishonest, I think he just wasn't being forthcoming. But, you know, even at that same point where I was looking at, hearing the discussion about the agency, the officer in his questioning was, you know, it was one of those things when you look through the public eye, you know, is it gonna look shady?
Right.
And, you know, and that's, you know, always the standard, you know, it's kind of like that I think people need to go through life with is, if I'm caught doing this and it makes the front page of the paper, what am I gonna say to my mom? And some people get that, and I'm not sure that this officer thinks that this hit the front page of the paper that he would have any problem discussing it with his mom, because I think what he, in his mind, really thought he was doing the right thing to try and get more money for the victims fund, and I really get that part of it. But it's that whole, and maybe it's the attorney in me, and I'm sure the other attorney will say the same thing, it's like, when you're entrusted with things, you have to take care of those things for the next person. And so, you know, he was taking care of it, but was it in the right manner? And so I think it's just, I don't know how it falls into the training of ethics, but to me, that's what kind of came to mind is there just needs to be a little refresher course on, don't do something that'll hit the front page of the papers and embarrass you in front of your mom.
And I think to your point, to George's point, there's a reason why we made this an allegation of serious misconduct. However, whatever you take out of section 1101 and stick to it, the fact of the matter is we made it an allegation of misconduct because it didn't pass the smell test. And I don't know what would have happened if somebody hadn't noticed and somebody hadn't started asking questions. But when someone noticed and started asking questions, we got on it and made it an allegation of serious misconduct. I appreciate all your concerns about how this looks to the public in every way, shape, or form. It's unacceptable, and that's why it was an allegation of misconduct, and that's why it was sustained.
Any other policy and training consideration? All right, adjudication recommendations. Anybody disagree?
Nope, I don't disagree, but I have a comment.
Sure.
And first want to say, since we haven't, I guess we're the guests here at this meeting, listening to Bernadette earlier said her practice is to read through the investigative report first and then listen. And I typically listen cold to interviews as opposed to reading the report. What I very much, when we have ICV, the in-car video, I track the report first because it's very difficult to interpret. And even video, like we've had some with it out in the Sally Port of the jail, because that gives, I need perspective to understand the video, but I want to hear the flavor up front, so interviews I will do that. So now I comment on the adjudication. So the adjudication, I think I'm allowed to say, because there's no names, is that this officer violated policy because he removed the items from impound lot to his personal residence. He removed them to store them without authorization. I did not find in the policy something that says an officer has to have authorization to remove the items and store them at his house. So to me, there was a little bit of a disconnect. Reading some of the lower level findings, it seemed really the issue here was the missing report. But there's not, that I saw, a place that says, and I try to read every word, and I have to read it a couple of times, but nothing that comes out to me that says there's a policy that says you can have this property at your home and get authorization. So in that regard, I'm not sure that the adjudication the way it's stated is correct.
At least as to the first allegation comes.
Yes, yeah, that's what I'm focused on. Where it cites the 601.2 policy.
So if it would have been, didn't sign the paperwork properly, like the log out or that, so I hear what you're saying.
And, several of the more veteran officers said that's not right, that you can't have that property at his house during the interviews.
But if they don't sign it out, there's no authorization to take it.
Well, and maybe
I don't think it's the
maybe that's
authorization of
what.
asking a person, that's how I read it. It wasn't that he had to ask somebody, can I take this? It was, you need to fill out the paperwork that says, I'm removing this.
No, maybe somebody should get authorization before they take that property to their.
Yeah, but I don't think that's realistic, because when they're taking things out to take it to court, they just go and sign it out,
You don't ask them where they're taking it.
So it seems to me.
No, but it's their, maybe that's what it is, maybe Sergeant Vinci needs to explain how is property normally removed? What's
Exactly
the
that.
practice?
If you need for court or other legal purpose, you go, you sign it out, sign the back of the evidence property sheet, saying that it's in your chain of custody. You do need to have some reason why you're doing it.
You fill that in on the form, or?
Yes, on the back of the form, it has who's taking it for use.
It says the purpose you're taking it.
Yes.
So like if you go and take a gun to take to court for evidence, you would sign it out and say, take it to court.
It is
It
about
says
the
that
point
here.
that it doesn't.
She's taking, E on page 4, E2B, which item he is taking along with the reason for the transfer and document date and time of transfer. So, I agree, there's not a specific, can I take this to my residence? Who do I need to get approval to do that? But, at least in this circumstance, E2B was not followed, and I think that's.
But to me, authorization is usually some kind of approval.
Yeah.
Reading the word and how I'm used to it, what the meaning of that word is. But I appreciate that pointing that out, maybe it is. You're the only one, you sign it, you authorize it, so if you filled out the form, would there not, it wouldn't have been sustained?
Right.
If you filled it out truthfully, if you filled it out truthfully that I'm taking this. Well, it would be, yes, that would be truthful. And I'm doing exchange time for cleaning it, yeah, I think.
Mr. Chairman, I hate to do this, I wish I knew the detente way to do it, the diplomatic way, but we have gone well over our time, and we have a panel coming up at 7. So I'll either need to wrap it up, or we'll need a motion to extend time for your
No, I
deliberations.
think we're really at the conclusion anyway.
I got nothing else to say.
All right, thank you.
I said my piece, thank you.
We'll take a few minutes to answer questions.
So I guess the next agenda item would be a discussion about the process. Why don't we just ask if there are any questions about the process? We can have a discussion beforehand.
That's fine for me. We will have a panel coming in here in about 5 or 10 minutes, and probably it might be a good time to take a break now. Finish this after the panel, if you all are willing to stay until after the homeless panel. That's entirely up to you. This is your time, and I wouldn't ask to infringe on it.
I would just ask are there going to be extensive questions? If there's only like a couple of questions, then we can just wrap this up before break.
All right. Do the commissioners have any questions? I think I saw your hand up, James. Did you have something that you wanted to ask?
Yeah, well, from listening to, not knowing the full details, it's obviously I have a lot of questions that I have answered because it drew out more questions than answered. You're talking about ethics, you talk about assumptions, you talk about appropriation of items because an individual figure that they are the ones, the chosen ones to do something to replace it or to replenish it or to refurbish it or whatever the case may be. And you're talking more like, well, you need a policy for this, you need a policy for that. So I don't know, at some point, I believe that EPD hires reasonable people to act out this, and to say that it's not written in black and white is a very bad assumption, because there are things that you know, if you think it's wrong, then it's wrong. And there is no way to cover that up, whether or not, and you can't tell what an individual's intent is, because nobody knows what the person's intent is, but we know what the actions were. So that, I was wondering, my question would be, when you do your policies and stuff, and your screening stuff, would it be possible to kind of say that, okay, here's a policy that we looked at, and share that with the commission and stuff, and perhaps the commission may want to take a look at it as well?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely what we do. First, we ask as command staff whether or not there is a policy or it's appropriate to have one, or is there some other policy that might address it, and if not, then we do refer that to our liaison to the police commission, who does write policies or at least review the request. And we've done that over the years, and a couple of them have been implemented.
Yeah. And, well, we should have clarified, we landed on judgment. Just real quick, Bob, I understand your time, that you're expected to use good judgment at all times. Good judgment is defined as those decisions and actions which a reasonable employee in similar circumstances would use or take given the information you knew or should have known at the time. I think that was the allegation we landed on for the very reasons that you explained. You can't have a policy for everything. And so there's policies like that that deal with that broader, what are you thinking kind of deal. So.
Thank you. I might explain at this point, before I get to the next commissioner, that George really wears two hats. He serves on both the police commission as a voting member, and he is here because he serves on the subcommittee review board. So earlier, when there was dialogue, I didn't want anybody to think the commission was jumping in. All of us know, but anyway, the people who were in the audience today, so thank you. And Juan Carlos, I believe you're next.
Yeah, thank you for being here in the explanation on how you do the cases. I've sat in your meetings a couple of times, and I can appreciate now more how much training you have to go through and try to honor your own mission, which is in part how to build the trust and confidence with the community on the fairness of these cases. I can appreciate more and more and more. I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to just focus on one. It's obviously not related to the actual case because I don't have the background and all the information you have. But it occurs to me, as Commissioner Manning was asking, are there any cases in which you see instances in which policies that you're trying to apply to the cases are currently being reviewed by the Police Commission or EPD? And if that's the case, what do you do with those cases?
With our liaison, I'm not sure what has been pushed in your direction. Historically, our liaison has been responsible for that. I know George is fairly new with the police commission. And
we did have one question about something, and I remember emailing it to you and then forwarding it on to the people. And I forget what it was, but
I do remember Bernadette bringing, I think there were 3 policies in the last fiscal year that Bernadette brought to the police commission retreat. With the work plan issue, I think, I don't think we've ever had anything coincident as far as timing, you know, where the CRB is reviewing a case where police commission is at the same time reviewing the policy. But I know we've had issues where CRB has recommendations on the policy, the liaison brings that to the police commission to work into the work plan.
I think you're looking at one of them having to do with jail transfer that came up in one of our reviews. I think that's one of them. And then there was one about self-injury in car. You know, we do that with some frequency.
Okay, and then Tamara was next in the queue.
I'm just briefly, I can see where your body drilling down to the details of the case kind of highlights, not that a new policy is needed, but the thing about, you know, can property be removed? Does it say that in policy, protocol, procedures anywhere? Should mileage be logged of all vehicles when they leave the premises for any reason and logged when it comes back? Those kinds of things seem really obvious that the work that you guys are doing doesn't necessarily generate a new policy need, but maybe tightening up a policy and procedures or protocols.
Thank you. And Before we take our break, I'd just like to say thank you for coming, because this, it really illustrates the difficulty, complexities, and the nuances, all three, of any investigation, and how hard and difficult it is to reach a decision. So I think the process you go through helps the chief in his deliberations and helps everyone else to understand. And I thank you for your time and effort, and thank you for coming. At this time, we'll recess and convene back at 7 o'clock.
7:05.
7:05. I'll give you a full 10 minutes, Mike. Okay. Thank you.
Going down to either side of the That's all you Jim, come on back.
It's surprising that I ever got married. It's like, I try to remember that we are in the process as opposed to and so how long is this report? Because again, it's like I want to make sure and then see how many things are everything like that. That's not your point. I read this. So
Okay, everyone, I'd like to ask everyone to come to be seated, and we'll get started with the second half of our program tonight. Okay, we're going to get started on the second half of our program tonight, which will be the homeless panel is going to address the issues, if I might just briefly go over what our focus is here tonight. The intent of the panel is to look at the perspective of policing in the homeless community. So everybody here tonight is focusing their discussions strictly and narrowly on what goes on between the police and the community. We want their perspective. This does not represent anybody else's perspective. They're not speaking for a group or a number of other people. They're speaking for themselves, and they're going to tell you what their perspective is tonight on how they have come to be involved in the homeless situation that we have in Eugene. And the thought behind this is that as they tell us what's going on and how it impacts them, the commission will be able to get and glean some information that will help us decide what policies on the police operations need some looking at further, and we'll discuss that after, and what policies may need changing. So that's the hope for tonight. Carter has been really helpful in getting this panel together, helping me get people here who are knowledgeable and have worked in the community and understand the problem. So I'm going to let her introduce the panel tonight, so she knows who everybody is.
Perfect. I will start with Captain Sam Kamkar is with the Eugene Police Department and has been in the downtown team and was involved in the Occupy Eugene camp at Washington Jefferson Park. Tom Happy is a resident in Jefferson West Side neighborhood and has he's got the residential perspective of homelessness and policing. Pastor Dan Bryan is pastor at First Christian Church downtown and is the chair of the Opportunity Village Board. Jessica Thomason she owns Rap City, food cart in Kesey Square, and has some pretty immediate direct business perspective about homelessness and policing. And Ricardo is currently experiencing homelessness.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll begin with Ricardo, if that's all right. Ricardo, you can tell us, since you are a person that's profoundly affected by this problem. Would you start for us, please?
I'm not sure what you want to hear. It is a problem that is growing. We have all walks of life out here: mental, veterans, homeless people, regular homeless people, just all different. Again, it's growing. What Sleep's program's doing is great. I realize the police department has to do their job, but it's quite wearing. It's wearying. I'm wore out. I don't know what else to say.
Well, we're interested in your interaction with the police and what you observed and how you feel about that.
Again, I'll say they're doing their job. It seems that policies are changing. We seem to have plenty of warning to move from site to site. There's no reason for tickets. I'm not sure what goes on behind the scenes. So far, it's not gotten out of hand. Nobody's gotten violent or anything. It's just, I guess, is what it is.
Thank you. Thank you. There will be questions after we get done with everyone. We've decided to allow the panel to finish their presentation, then you can ask individual questions as we go around. Okay? So Jessica, you be next. Thank you.
Jessica Thomason, owner of Rap City Food Cart. Thank you for your time and your ear. We appreciate it, and everybody being here. My personal experience as a business owner downtown in the heart of Eugene has been one of sheer pleasure watching the town grow. But with that, the things that I experience and my husband experience on a regular basis, concerning homelessness and the interaction with the police. There's some specific activities that go on down there that affect us greatly. not just us, of course, all the businesses around there. There's, of course, there's drug use that goes on, and there is harassment, physical and verbal. Just today, I was physically harassed. There's damage and vandalism to the cart, which happens a lot. And this happens to all the people that we work downtown. Now, in relation with the police department, from what I've seen in 2 years down there, 5 days a week, quite a few hours a day, is good behavior and prudent work done by the police department and the security guards down there. They've done their job well, they've done it with tact, and they've done it in bravery down there. It gets tough, as you know. So I really have seen great work. I've seen the problem that arises for us is that after these things are done and the police have done their work and the security guards have done their work down there, the homeless people that create illegal activities and environments are there immediately afterwards. The woman who physically assaulted me today was arrested, and now she's, as I've heard, on the streets tonight. So these are things that make it very difficult and have a huge financial impact. But as far as what I've seen from the illegal activity that comes from some homeless people, and the way the police handle it, it's just been great. And we're really thankful for it.
Thank you. Dan?
So, I'm Dan Bryant, and yes, I'm pastor of First Christian Church in the heart of Eugene. Came here in 1991. I came into ministry not with any desire in any way to become an advocate for the homeless. That was not really on my radar screen or my intent. And nor was the training that I received. But the training I received in seminary, theological, biblical training, really emphasizes in religious terms that every person is a child of God, in non-religious terms that every person has worth and deserves to be treated with respect and dignity. And in my previous church in Fresno, I saw, someone homeless about once every few weeks, and I would deal with that situation as best I could. When I came here, serving in downtown church at 12th and Oak, it became daily. And by the mid-90s, it became so overwhelming that we were faced with a situation that either we were going to have to put a fence in front of our office with a buzzer and control access, or something was going to have to change just because of the demands on not only my time but other staff time meant that I just couldn't do the rest of my job. And I was blessed to have a retired minister in the congregation who appeared about that same time and offered his services, and we created what we call our Good Samaritan ministry. That's simply a walk-in ministry, that we have trained volunteers who do nothing but sit and wait for people to walk in the office. I just picked up the bulletin to check the numbers. So far this year, they have seen 1,683 people that just cold calls, walk-ins. It's just constant. There are many times I come into my office and there'll be 4 or 5 people sitting there waiting to talk to our volunteer to help figure out their situation. Now, not all of these are homeless, but a big chunk of them. In the mid-90s, when the car camping became legal, we were the first site that signed up for it. We've had people living in our parking lot since day one. We have served well over 100 people through that program, most of whom have transitioned out into successful housing, some not successfully, and have ended up in a variety of other situations and were forced to leave. We started a free breakfast on Sunday mornings a couple of years ago, first of once a month and twice a month, and now with the help with 4 or 5 other congregations, we now do it every Sunday morning. We serve 250 to 300 people every Sunday. We've served 8,190 meals so far this year on our free breakfast every Sunday morning. We have been participants in the interfaith shelter program since it began 22, 23 years ago for families. We serve 10 to 12 families typically for 3 weeks that sleep in the basement of our church. That program run by St. Vincent de Paul. And we are the central site for the Eugene Warming Center when it is open. And that anyone who's on the street any night below 30 degrees, they know they can come to our church. They are then bussed out to the other sites from there. And at some point, when those other sites are filled and the remainder then sleep in our basement, typically we have 80 or so sleeping in our basement on those nights. So all that's just to say, oh, and I forgot our clothing ministry that's been operating for over 50 years, 60 years. We do a lot of work with the homeless. And through all of that, and then Opportunity Village, I should add too, that I serve it, which opened on August 30th. We have been open for 2 weeks, running very successfully now. Yay. 14 people now in the village, happy as can be. It's just really exciting work. Neat bunch of people. In fact, I just came from Resurrection Episcopal Church, where the rector there is being installed, and the villagers were all there because the rector, Brent Wass, was the head of our vetting committee that picked those 14, and they all wanted to show him support, came to the thing tonight to support eating with the congregation. And we'll take 5 new people will be admitted into the village in the next 2 weeks, and we hope within about 2 months that we'll be up to full capacity, somewhere around 40. We're having our open house on October 5th, 1 p.m. You're all invited to be a grand opening. Mayor Kitty has agreed to come speak at that. So from all of this experience, I can just say that, yeah, there's a fair segment out there that are problematic, and I've dealt with a good many of them. And we have evicted a few people, we have trespassed people, we have dealt with that problem. But I've also come to know another side of the homeless, many people that are just decent human beings, no fault of their own, or maybe they have some issue, but still decent human beings struggling to survive. And when you're living on the street, it is very difficult to just care for your basic necessities. I have witnessed some absolutely fabulous things of our police department. My favorite example was coming downtown and right at Kesey Square, and I see dear Susie, that I've known for some time, classic shopping cart, bag lady kind of person that's well known in the downtown area. And 2 police officers talking to her. This is first thing in the morning. Susie had been camping out at Kesey Square for a couple of days, and I could just imagine the conversation of, Susie, you can't stay here, you need to move on, I'm not sure what. I was at a meeting later that day, walking back to the meeting, lo and behold, there's Susie in front of my office, and Officer Randy Ellis. Now, Officer Ellis is quite well known among the homeless. In particular, I hear their complaints frequently about how hard he can be. And I walk up, and here is Officer Ellis asking her about her feet and saying to her, I have some shoes back in the office I can go get for you. And I looked at her feet, and they were just in terrible condition. And I've no doubt he was lying through his teeth, and he was going to go buy some shoes for her, but he was wanting to give her some dignity. And so and I've seen that kind of thing many times of officers who treat those who are homeless quite well. I've also, I can't say I've had direct experience, but I hear lots of stories of folk who feel that they have been mistreated. So from all of that, I would simply say, as my kind of philosophical perspective, is that the homeless deserve every chance, that we need to view the homeless the same we would race, gender, sexual orientation, as a class. And I don't know if there are any laws to that effect, but certainly as policies that the homeless deserve to be given every chance, treated with respect, should be not discriminated against because they are homeless, but only the activity, the problematic activity, when they are doing something illegal that's out of line, that's what we need to address. The homelessness itself, we need to address with compassion and finding ways for the homeless to be able to exist. They are members of our community, like it or not. They deserve a place to be, and we need policies to help them to do that. I hear lots of stories about how we attract the homeless because we're there's so many programs for them, and I just came from a meeting in Salem today where my colleague, pastor at the First Baptist Church in McMinnville, was reporting about the dramatic increase of young adult homeless in his community. You know, this it's a problem throughout our state, throughout our nation. It's not anything unique to us, but we each have to figure out those solutions to address that. So, that's enough for now.
Thank you. Tom?
My name is Tom Happy. I'm a downtown resident, and I was kind of hoping Dan would keep talking because then I wouldn't have to.
I could, but
this isn't my most comfortable forum. But anyway, so my experience has just been as a homeowner and resident downtown, near downtown, by and large, you know, I see homeless, or what I consider to be homeless people on a daily basis. I live near a park, and there's a lot of traffic to and from the park. My property abuts an alley, and the alley has a direct access to kind of a right-of-way that goes into the back part of the park. So and it's a short alley, so there's a lot of traffic there too. Most of my experience with homeless has been in that environment, and to a large degree, it's involved drug or alcohol use. Particularly at the park. I own the property next to my residence as well. It's a rental, and it's got an outbuilding in the back off the alley, which is not fenced off. And so I've, on a number of occasions over the years, found people back there either drinking or sleeping sometimes, or even a few times shooting up drugs and leaving the paraphernalia. I found the paraphernalia left behind when I haven't seen them. It's interesting listening to him. There are a couple of characters I see frequently, and I almost feel like I'm getting to know them a little bit. I've interacted with one particular man. I found him passed out on my property 5 or 6 times over the years, and the first couple of times I was pretty blunt with him. You need to wake up. You need to get out of here. Third or fourth time I was kind of like, man, I started thinking, where does this guy have to go? So I was a little bit more of a soft touch with him. I was witness to cahoots coming to the park. I saw them pull up, saw the lights. It was about 11 o'clock at night. I was about ready to go to bed, and I thought, well, wonder what's going on. I'll go down and check. And it was him. And he was not able to stand, and they were trying to get him up to get him into the van. And they asked if anybody there knew who this guy was. And one other person knew his name, and I didn't know his name, but I had experience with him. So we kind of, they were looking for a little bit of support about how to deal with him. And so I found out his name through that process through hearing him being asked questions. And so I've encountered him a few times since then, and we're actually kind of on a first name basis. And he's often or usually intoxicated, but he knows who I am. He actually thanked me one time when he was sober for helping him out that night. Put a little bit of humanity to the issue. I wasn't asked to come here and offer my opinion, so I won't, but I just will say that most of my experience has been kind of dealing with some of the more problematic behaviors. I've also, there are groups of kids that I've inadvertently followed them when I've been heading down to the library, for example, coming from our park to the downtown bus area. And some of these kids used to hang out in front of the library. And I don't know, I've been told some of them are homeless. I don't know if they are or not, but I've also just encountered stuff with them. Again, I found groups of them sitting back by my garage drinking alcohol, and they're always willing to leave when I say, you can't do that here. One of the biggest impacts on me, though, that's just, I guess, part of living downtown, and I accept it. One of the biggest impacts for me, though, is I have kids, and my daughter, who's now 13, I think she's old enough now that she kind of makes jokes about, we live in the homeless neighborhood of town. But when she was younger, she was legitimately afraid a few times. We'd have At the park, there's a covered shelter, and we often had groups of people drinking alcohol, and they seemed like they were homeless only because they had grocery carts with them and big bags of stuff. And sometimes, most of the time, they seemed to mind their own business, they were just drinking, but sometimes they could be verbally abusive to anybody and nobody in particular. And so, you know, my daughter's lived in our home since she was 2, and she's kind of grown up with that, and it scared her for a long time. And now, you know, when she turned 11 or 12, the groups of kids coming from downtown to the park to, you know, drink or do drugs also intimidated her. So it's had an impact on my family, too. As far as interactions with the police, I call the police frequently. Anytime I see anybody in the park with a can of alcohol or doing anything else illegal, I call the police. I'm not always at the park to see if they respond. My impression is that most of the time nobody comes, or at least they don't come in time to deal with it. But I have had officers show up when I've been at the park, and I've noticed 2 things. One is they, but you know, invariably they seem to be respectful to the people, and then I've noticed in some cases they seem to know these folks. And the other thing is they, if there is something illegal going on, the problem goes away. I'm not sure what they say to them, how they deal with it, but you know, later the folks are gone. So you know, that's pretty anecdotal, but that's been my experience with the issue of homeless and the impacts on neighborhood. And I will say one thing. A group of us neighbors got together to kind of work on how to improve the environment in our park, since it seemed to be getting used largely for illegal activity. And the city, in the middle of that process, they decided to remove the picnic tables from the shelter at our park, which is where a lot of the illegal activity was happening. And the problem has largely gone away with drinking alcohol, groups drinking alcohol. You know, I think it was on the radar as a safe place to go and not be bothered. One other issue I forgot to mention is occasionally in our park, which is about half a block from my house, there will be people camping. You know, sometimes I'm coming home from meetings or something at night, and I'll see folks camp there. I used to call the police on occasion for that. I've decided not to do that anymore, because I just, you know, they need a place to sleep, although I don't think that's really the best place to do it. But I do notice that they don't tend to be there in the morning when I oftentimes leave early and they're not there. So I don't know if they don't stay long or if other neighbors are calling. But that is another issue with the illegal camping. And I should add one other note. I haven't experienced it directly, but a neighbor of mine, his property borders the park, and he has sanitation issues. His fence is right on the right of way where people come and go, and there are a lot of human waste accumulates in that spot. And so again, that's not something I've directly experienced, but he's complained to me about it many times. And I guess that's about it for now.
Thank you, Tom. Captain.
Well, my name is Sam Kamkar, and I am a captain, but I spent most of my career as a line level officer, so I'll try to talk from that perspective as much as I possibly can. My experience with homelessness actually started out at a young age, primarily because of my older brother, who suffers from mental illness. And he's schizophrenic, and because of his condition, he couldn't stay home. So he would either get arrested by the police or be out on the street, get beat up, become a victim of a crime, or when he was home, he would do something that would get him kicked out. So growing up seeing that was troublesome, but it certainly made an impression on me that made a difference in how I viewed homelessness. Later on, at the age of 14, my mom and I, because of financial reasons, became homeless. And it had to do with the sort of the political change, where I came from, and over the course of my high school years, I got to experience living in the back of a Datsun B210, which was a really a good car, plenty of space in the back, actually. And when the Datsun wasn't around, you couch surfed, and you made ends meet, or broke the law and slept on the floor of a pizza parlor that my family and I worked out of. And but throughout all of that, it allowed me to come into contact with law enforcement, and this was in Southern California, and I got to see the difference, a real difference between those police officers that you all were mentioning early on about their level of professionalism and compassion, such as the stories about Randy Ellis, and the being tough yet at the same time being, compassion. And I got to experience some of that being on the receiving end. I also got to see some very unprofessional behavior by some police officers, and those left an impression with me too. And when you're a young man and you see those things, it certainly makes a difference in your life. Right around the age of 19 or so, I went on a ride-along with a Portland police officer named Katie Potter. She was the daughter of Tom Potter, police chief. And it was my first time going on a ride-along in Portland, and I saw the way she interacted with one homeless person during the course of this 8-hour shift that we were together. And I saw the level of compassion and humanity that Katie gave to this particular individual, and it really resonated with me, and I fell in love with the job, and I've been hooked ever since. I heard you mention professionalism, compassion, just listening to my colleagues here, and some of the challenges with the businesses. Just looking back in the past 20 years or so that I've been doing this, I can tell you that quite frequently, as a police officer, my experience has been that we're sort of caught between a rock and a hard place. Most frequently, we're responding to a call for service from somebody, whether it's a business owner or homeowner, that they need somebody moved up to move along from their property. And it's been my experience that the overwhelming majority of the time, the people that I've come in contact with, they've either reminded me of somebody like my brother who suffered from mental illness, or people who were alcoholics or had drug addiction, and very seldom the people that I came in contact with were people that didn't have some significant either mental or physical issues that essentially push them to being to where they're at. Be that as it may, it's every single day going home at the end of the night of having to address those concerns. You take those experiences home with you, and thinking about those individuals, those homeless folks, and what they go through, and knowing that quite frequently all you've done as a police officer, all I did as a police officer was give them a ticket, put handcuffs on them, or take them to jail, or got into a physical altercation with them. And I'm hoping that through this conversation and conversations like this, we can take the necessary steps as a community this large to be able to find some permanent solutions so that our officers can concentrate on catching burglars and the bad guys as opposed to dealing with homeless issues. I have a tendency to talk a lot, so I'll stop right there.
Thank you, Captain, and thank everybody again from all of us that you took your time tonight to come down here and speak to us. I realize that time is a valuable commodity today, and you guys are just great for coming down here and speaking to us. I wonder, since we still have a little time in your portion of the program, if anyone, especially Ricardo, who I unfairly called on first, so you had to jump in right away, if anyone has heard anything here from the panel tonight that they would like to expand on or, like to comment about before we move on to the question. Second.
I would like to say if I've taken on the humanity part of it with these people out here, and I've served them for a couple of years before I was homeless, and I'm very aware of what the drug scenario and different issues that are going on. But I see these people at the feeds and camping, and it's been my approach to be, humane with them, just to go that extra mile. Kindness, and it seems to go a lot further than to be hasty. It's been a real experience.
I would add, one of the understandings that has really helped me is that in many, if not all, or certainly most cases, the drug and alcohol use is a means of self-medication. And the classic example I can think of is my friend William, who served in Vietnam and behind the lines in Laos, Cambodia, military intelligence, came back mentally very wounded. He was the most problematic individual I've ever dealt with. He was 86th from every VA facility in the country, was not allowed to step foot on any VA property. And we kept calling him up and saying, no, wait a second, this is one of your guys, and you're telling me you can't deal with him? That you expect the rest of us to deal with him after you so damaged him, But he was an angry drunk, and when he was drunk, he was very problematic, no doubt about it. It wasn't until the Obama administration put extra money into veterans program, and some vet officer finally took his case on and got him into housing, that they could deal with his alcohol problem. And since then, I don't say he's a model citizen, but he's a great guy, and he's getting along very well. So it was just a real eye-opening experience for me to see this transition from this guy who Officer Ellis knows very well and probably arrested him many times, and how now he's doing quite well. And so I just see that as there's so many of these folks out on the street who, yeah, they use drugs, and not all, and certainly just separated, but sure, there are a good many that do. And it's their means of dealing with their problem. Or the other way, William Wise at St. Vincent de Paul really helped me understand this, is when you have a mental condition that causes your mind to race at you're thinking 100 different thoughts, and it makes you incapable of doing anything else. It's often the drugs, illegal drugs, and particularly the methamphetamine, that helps you. We see it as the big problem, but it helps you. It helps you control your thinking so that you can function. So the unfortunate thing is we haven't learned how to deal with the problems that people have, and the homelessness is just part of the symptom that adds to it. So if we can at least have some understanding of some of those issues behind the alcohol use and the drug use that makes the problem worse, it will help us, I think, at least dealing with the people and trying to help find solutions to the problems they face.
Okay, thank you very much again. And now we've reached the time for questions from the commissioners, so I'll start a queue on Carlos and then George.
First, I want to say thank you for taking the time to share in just a few minutes what you do. Pastor Brian, one of the things that I appreciate about your program, what you do, is that religion is not pushed on people like me who's been homeless before too. I really appreciated that over the years. And I know I've spoken to some officers that have taken some folks to get assistance. Do you guys see any kind of policies that could be improved that we can work on? And do you see any programs, specific programs that can be implemented citywide?
The meeting that I just came from was dealing with criminal justice issues. And I'm sure Chief Kearns might know more about this. The example in Yamhill County and what they're doing in Yamhill, that's really, from what I understand, is quite phenomenal. Are you familiar with it?
I don't know about that one.
Really, and I don't know a whole lot about it, but one of the specifics, they're trying to redirect their resources. And one of them that just stunned me, that just seems counterintuitive, they have dropped bail for lower offenses. They have determined that probably about 85% of the arrests they make are low, risk kinds of offenses, and that there is no reason to put that individual in jail because they can't pay bail. So instead of typically what they would have done was arrest the person, he can't make bail, he sits in jail for a number of days, finally gets out. They decided to do away with the bail. The person does not go to jail, and actually their appearance at trial increased, and the recidivism decreased. And part of the learning from this was that, by putting people in jail, we actually are making the problem worse, either because of who they're associating with while they're in jail, or the financial burden that placed on them while they're in jail. When they get out, now they've got more problems on top of their legal problems, blah, blah, blah. And it actually turned out to be more cost effective by not putting them in jail, citing them, releasing them. So, I don't know. Check with your colleagues in Yamhill to find out more.
I'm sorry, I'm going back to my queue. George was next, and then...
So Dan, you brushed on the issue. You said there has been rumors that because we have so many social agencies, it's attracted homeless from outside, and maybe you said, but I didn't hear if you had an answer to that.
Well, sure, several. Number one, if you're living in Crestwell or Cottage Grove or blah, 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 and you become homeless and there are no services, of course you're going to come into the city. Number two, I did a survey of our 300 people eating breakfast on Sunday morning. Over half of them have lived in this community for over 10 years. A fourth of them lived here for 20 years. How many people here were born in Eugene? 1, 2. Well, we've attracted all these people to this community, I think there are a lot of different ways you can look at it, and people come to the urban areas because that's where the services are. And that's true in every urban area. It's not more so true for Eugene than anywhere else.
Well, I'm talking, let's say, I'm talking about outside our community. I consider Crestwell, Cottage Grove, Veneta, Elmira our
Sure,
community.
good.
So
people travel, but my hunch, and it'd be interesting to test this out. I mean, maybe it's higher. I mean, certainly there are some who come, but my hunch from just the little bit of surveying I've done, the folk that we are serving our free breakfast to pretty much mirrors the congregation I serve in terms of their length of time that they've been in this community. So yeah, there are some that come, but there are sure a whole lot more that have been here for a long time. And of course the problem is once you do become homeless, you don't have the resources to be traveling up and down. Hitchhiking works for some, but not that many.
thank you.
Okay, James, and then Joe, and then Jesse.
Thank you. First of all, to the panel, thank you so much for being here and sharing your experiences and your insightfulness and stuff regarding homelessness. It's a very complex problem. Captain Kamkar, thank you so much for sharing a brief portion of your life. I too, as a child, was homeless, so I very well have a lot of experience and stuff with not having a place to sleep, a place to eat, or anything like that. However, I think that the question that George raised was one that I was going to ask, what is attracting people, but more importantly, is it that we have a local safety net that's falling apart, where people here are just falling out of the comforts of housing and stuff and wind up on the streets. Is that a structural issue that we have here within the city, or goes back to what George was saying, or we just having advertisement that Eugene is a place to come and make a living, and we'll provide you with certain basic needs, or try to. Pastor Brian.
So, I'm not an expert on this, and I'm sure there are others that could probably give a better answer, but I would just say from what I have seen that this is a nationwide problem, first of all. It's not just a collapse here. So I hear from my colleagues same stories in just about every single urban area I know. Secondly, we intentionally created a system 30 years ago where we made a decision as a community, and you can talk to people like Richie Weinman and Pearl Wolf and others that have been working in this field a long time. We made a decision as a community that the only emergency shelter, mass shelter, was going to be the Mission, and that we would put all of our other resources into transitional housing or other programs, and we would let the Mission do all the shelter, emergency shelter, bring in mass. So that's really the only game in town for large numbers, because it was a conscious decision we made. The result of that is that if the Mission does not work for you, there's no other place to go. And there are many reasons why the Mission does not work for a big segment of the homeless. Some's religious, but not all. I've dealt with a number of folk who have huge issues either with things like being around crowds. They can't be around the crowd. It makes their mental health, worse. People that don't like the clientele. They don't want to be around drug addicts. I'm not a drug addict, and there are too many drug addicts there, that kind of thing. People that are claustrophobic. I have a couple that I'm working with, a gentleman in a wheelchair, very claustrophobic. He can't stand being in that environment, and so on and so forth. So when that's our only shelter, then there's no other place for those folk to go. So I see it then as just a multitude of issues, not just one issue of collapse of structures, but all these other factors. Plus, on top of that fact, probably you're all aware the Mission made it a significant downsize this summer, where they actually reduced the number of folk. And this is the first time in the 22 years I've been in this community that I have known, you can speak to Jack Tripp to check this out, that the Mission is full over the summer. It used to be that the Mission had lots of vacant beds in the summer, would only fill up in the winter. It's no longer true. They're full now. They're turning people away. So it's a significant uptick in the number of folk for whom there are no shelter. When we did the one-night homeless count this year, we counted over 1,700 individuals on January 30th. In the midst of winters when our numbers start. We have, at that time, we had in this community somewhere in the neighborhood of 550 to 600 shelter beds. That means there are over 1,100 people on January 30th for whom there is no shelter bed available. And right now, it's less than that. I mean, the number of shelter beds is less. The disparity is greater than that. I would say probably we're in well over 1,500, if not 2,000 people for whom there is no shelter bed, period. So they have nowhere else to go. And why? I mean, there's a multitude of factors.
Brief follow-up.
Go ahead, James.
Yeah. Well, what I was specifically asking is that you have knowledge of like the people that are here in Eugene that have actually lived in houses for whatever reason, lost their home or can't stay in a house, that have fallen into this role, and what do you think? I mean, a variety of reasons could be lack of affordable housing. Have you heard anything like that? With the numbers increasing? Sure.
There are the folks who've lost jobs, medical emergencies, what have you. The biggest one that I encounter are people who live on disability. Their income is $690 to $700 a month. I dare anyone to live on $700 a month in this community. I have one gentleman in our church that we support pretty heavily with a lot of people loaning him money, giving him little jobs to wash cars. He lives in a quad, sharing a kitchen with 3 other people. And he pays $400 a month. It leaves him, less than $300 to live on, and it's very difficult to do. And I think, and so we deal with a lot of folk in our office. They have a check, they have money at the first of the month, but they can't find any place, to go to. And in a lot of cases, they've been evicted for non-payment of rent because that $700 couldn't pay the rent and everything else. They get evicted, now they've got that bad rental history on their record. Now no landlord will rent to them because of that bad history. And it just, snowballs from there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Joe, you were next.
Yeah, I think we keep sort of getting towards the core issue and then backing away, and core issue and backing away. The January count is known to be a severe undercount, okay? Because it only gets those people who actually wandered in to get services. It doesn't get the people who stayed under their tarp in the woods, in the wetlands or whatever, and it doesn't get a lot of other people. So the numbers are far higher. And, we talk about things like, well, it attracts people to come here. But what about cities like Los Angeles and Miami that are under court orders not to criminalize sleeping? Why don't all of our people go to there? It's the same argument. Okay, they don't. They stay here because this is where they live. But the issue that we have is we've been doing a lot of response with police, which is, come in, you tell the person to move along, they move along. You tell them you can't drink, whatever. But the problem is still here. In other words, what we have been doing has not solved homelessness. So the question is, why are we still continuing to do X when X doesn't work? And what we need to be doing is Y, which is solving the problem, having a different response that actually solves it. Would any of you care to comment on that?
Not all at once, though.
I'll just comment from a street perspective where I sit every day, and from talking with them and being with them every day, is there's no mental health services for these people. The woman who struck me today is so severely mentally ill. And that's just a repeating story that I hear every single day. The drug use and the mental illness is not being addressed, and they're back the next day, and they're back the next day, and they're causing us so much damage, and themselves so much damage, and you just see it in their face. You just see them age. And so to me, from what I've heard from homeless people themselves who I frequently talk to and are friends with, that's the problem. There's no help for the mentally ill and the severely addicted.
Other thoughts?
I would concur. When I've called the police on people drinking in the park or sleeping by my garage or whatever, I often ask myself, where are they going to go? They're going to come, they're going to roust them, they might arrest them, they're going to shoo them down the street, they're going to go somewhere. And I see that in my instance, I don't, as an individual, I don't know what I can do. All I know is I need to safeguard my property and take care of my family. But I think as a community, there's got to be resources. And when you keep seeing the same people who are either mentally ill or addicted, and they're not, their situation's not being dealt with, they're just going to keep doing what they do, just somewhere else maybe. And to me, that's the tragedy, that they don't have what they need. And I also think I have a brother who has been homeless, and he's pretty severely addicted. And I think there are some people who are going to resist help and resist being housed. And I'm not sure what to do with that. But I don't think that's the majority of people. I really highly doubt that. So that's just my opinion.
Okay, moving on, I have Jesse and then Mike and then Tamara.
All right, quick comment on Pastor Bryant's comment about Yamhill County and not booking people in. One thing that happens here is if somebody goes into jail overnight, unless they serve 24 hours, they don't get credit for 1 day time served. So a lot of these crimes that are in our packet yield sentences from 1 to 5 days of jail. And where you say that they actually have a better show-up rate at court, that kind of makes sense, because if you went to jail overnight for something you view as a minor crime, like a minor criminal trespass, feel like you've been punished. Why should you have to go to court for that? So I appreciate hearing that. Then my question is, the mission's full, somebody shows up, they turn them away, they obviously have to go camp. We know there's people camping all around the city. Some people get cited for it, some don't. I have to think that it kind of depends on where you're camping, and there's an idea that if you camp where we can't see you, then we're probably not going to cite you tonight, but we might tomorrow. My question is, where should our community tell people to go sleep? Because they've got to. There's a lot of them out there.
Mr. Brown, we don't have an answer.
Any ideas? No.
Yeah, I can tell you what I tell people. We're part of the Midtown Association. And we have an agreement as part of the Midtown Association with a security company. And it's their job to patrol the area and kind of keep people moving on. And I'm real honest with folk. I say, you know, you come sleep here, we're not going to bother you. But I have to tell you, if the security company comes up and finds you, they will ask you to leave, and if you don't leave, they will trespass you. And we have a letter on file with APD to cite, because we have to do that to stay in good terms with ours. And we have to just for our own sanitation reasons and what have you. But as it is, we frequently allow people to sleep around the building and just know that they could get ousted at any time. There's no good solution. I would say as a community, I think the car camping program is a fabulous program, and I just wish we could get more places, and I just go around preaching this. Excuse me to use the lingo, but you know, businesses and churches, I don't know why more people aren't. There's a little bit of a hassle, I'd have to admit. I mean, I deal with a lot of situations that I otherwise wouldn't have to deal with because of it. But what we get back in return for the individuals that we help is just tremendous. And they provide, in many cases, a great service in terms of additional security, eyes on your property during the night. And it used to be that you had to have a vehicle to be in the car camping program. Now with our Conestogas that we are providing, you know, someone without a vehicle can participate in the car camping program, being in one of our Conestogas. You know, stick them in your parking lot, and you know, you get a benefit from it. For me, that's the answer. If we could quadruple the number of sites, you know, Terry McDonald chaired City Council meeting. Numbers serve me right. I think he said 50-some that are in the car camping 50-some individual sites, a total of about 70 people. Well, we need to greatly up that number in the community so that we have more places for people to go. So I would just urge people, speak to business owners, pastors, others, sign up for that program, get someone in your parking lot.
Thank you. Next I have Mike and then Ted.
Thank you. 2 questions of the panel for those that would want to answer me on this or give me your perspective. Laws, ordinance, policy. The police deal with, council passes, the police enforce those. They deal with behavior, not with status or class. I thought it was interesting, Pastor, that you brought up the idea of homelessness as a category of status or class. So one of my questions is, based on the special circumstances, should police direct their enforcement of behavior differently based on status or class? Should they be more understanding in some way than they otherwise might be?
You know, And I appreciate, especially after the tragedy of a number of years ago where we had the mentally ill gentleman with the knife who the police shot and killed, as I recall, wasn't that?
I apologize for interrupting. Our job here at the Police Commission is policy, so.
But
Should
the
we
policy
tell them to deal
that happened
with
is, if I understand correctly, after that, there was some additional training that was provided to officers of how to de-escalate in that kind of situation, so we don't kill somebody, even though it was justified, and that this guy was coming at him with a knife, but I think that kind of thing of what can we do to provide additional training, even though our police officers are not social service workers, but I think Officer Kempkar's testimony here just really illustrates the importance of that, of when an officer treats someone who is living on the street with dignity and respect, you will get higher return out of that in terms of their behavior. So even though their behavior might technically be illegal, breaking a crime in some small way of trespassing, what have you, treat them with dignity and respect, give them an opportunity to move on, clean up their act, change it, you will get more return. And certainly it's going to cost all of us less than arresting them or even trespassing them. Because even when you're writing a trespassing ticket to someone who has no source of income, who's just going to use up the system's time to appear in court if they appear, and so on and so forth, you know, it just seems like a waste of our resources. So yeah, I would say to use some sense of common sense and humanity to try to avoid adding to an individual's financial and legal problems as much as possible. But where you have truly criminal behavior, particularly drug use and of that serious kind of thing, you know, that you need to deal with. And no, then they shouldn't receive any special privileges. You need to deal with anything of that nature, and especially if any kind of violence is involved.
Anybody else? Because I have a second question. Second question then, one of the things that I find interesting, but at council we never talk about, is that there's a substantial difference in the reasons why some folks are homeless compared to other folks. Some folks through crappy circumstances you talked about tonight, through no fault of their own, and more, you know, a bad decision, or some serious issues with drugs and alcohol, or with mental health issues involved. There are some people too who do so by choice. There are some who do so to make a point with what they, political point that we've seen lately in the newspaper. So I wonder, is it worthwhile to talk about, because we talk about the homeless as kind of this amorphous group, is it worthwhile to talk about their circumstance differently? To talk about at either a council level or how police deal with the homeless? Is it worthwhile to talk about, you know, their intent and their reason for being there as a part of that? Sure.
I think it's obviously worthwhile, but quite honestly, the main issue that we have downtown is the criminal behavior. And that doesn't have anything to do with why they're homeless. It's the criminal behavior that they're committing. And it's the same if you're homeless because you've lost your job, or if you're severely addicted or mentally ill. It's causing the same problems and pain and infliction upon people.
Thanks.
I have Tamara next, and thing on the time here, we can get Joe in, he's the last one on the list, we'll cut it off after that.
I appreciate all of you being here today. It really is a good discussion and thought-provoking. It's a very complex problem, obviously, and I think all of you have helped frame different pieces of the puzzle about, you know, what can be done and what some options are. It's something that appears to be, any solution is going to be slow-moving, but I appreciate Pastor Bryant bringing up the car camping and expanding that. Obviously, that would take care of one small segment of the problem. Obviously, Opportunity Village takes up care of another small segment. You know, if we could somehow figure out funding programs for mental health, that would take care of another portion. just seems like a problem that just needs to be continued. The chipping away at it is the best that I think we can do as a community, but focusing on the problem, I think, and talking about it will assist people in becoming aware of it and maybe help chip out away at it a little more. So I appreciate all of you being here today.
Joe?
Yeah, the homeless count this year came up with less than 1,800 people. However, the area school system reports that there are more than 1,800 homeless students in the school system. 2 years ago, Lane County reported that there were 2,250 homeless students in the county. So I keep hearing this thing about choice, and yeah, there are some people on the street who are there by choice, but I've yet ever to hear a little kid go, "Mommy, Mommy, can we please be homeless? You know, I really want to sleep out in the cold and the rain and have people come take my stuff and, you know, tell us to move along. And Mommy, Mommy, I really want to do that, Mommy, Mommy." You know, I wonder, any thoughts about that kind of stuff?
It's quite civil.
Well, I'm sure that the children aren't committing criminal mischief and stealing from people and panhandling gone bad and using drugs. You know, they're not causing the criminal behavior.
But they are getting moved out of their camps.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every time they set up a camp, they get moved out of their camp.
Okay, we're not going to engage in a debate about this now, and I'm going to close this out. The chief has asked for a minute to speak, so I'll let him finish up, and then we're going to go into the next segment here.
Yeah, I'm not on the panel, but I did want to respond to one question that was asked earlier about whether or not homeless people should be treated differently by law enforcement or by the criminal justice system. And I think the answer is that law enforcement or the criminal justice system should do what works. And the Yamhill example is probably born out of a study somewhere that demonstrated that treating people with under certain circumstances in a certain way will get a different outcome. And just to give a real simple example, if a homeless person suffering from a mental health condition sits in the Broadway Plaza and drinks from a bottle of alcohol, they're going to get a ticket for drinking on unlicensed premises, or for consumption, or for having an open container. And if a 21-year-old law school student goes to a loud and disorderly party at the West University neighborhood and they walk out and drink a bottle of beer in the middle of the street, they're going to get the same ticket. The criminal justice system shouldn't deal with those two things the same way, because it's not going to have the same effect. You know, we should do what works for the person with the mental health condition, and we should do what works for the law school student who went to the, for any lawyers, or forgive me for using law school example, I could have used anything, I suppose.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, again. And those people who came for this segment, I appreciate your attendance. And if you'd like to grab a copy of the agenda, it does have all the Eugene Code and laws that affect or may, in fact, affect or impact homeless people more than some other aspects. So if you want to grab a copy of that, we have plenty of copies up there. And thank you, Carter, for getting it all together for us and for the commission in their packet. We're moving on now to the next segment, which is civil disputes. So we're going to go on to the civil disputes, and this is not this one is not a major bone of contention. We have pulled the other one on video recording because of two things. One, oh sure, Matt, I'm sorry. Please, I was going to get Carter to introduce him. Thank you. She's gone. Matt Lowen, can you come on up to the table with us, please? Sure. I'd like to take a minute to introduce Matt. Matt is our new policy analyst, is that correct?
Yeah, the policy and accreditation sergeant is my official title.
Okay, so
kind of a new assignment.
We've got accreditation going on, and so that's another huge task, and I can appreciate what you're going to have to do. to get that accomplished. My hat's off to you. So Matt is now going to be helping us also in our policy work as we go through the different policies to advise us on what his expertise will bring to us. So we withdrew the video recording because that's going to have to go to a different time for a couple of reasons. The records management system is now going to encompass, we were talking about, I think Jesse brought up that we wanted to talk about the length of time that video was stored in the case of IA complaints or in the case of potential complaints against police officers involved in an incident. So that is being changed by the records management system, and also I think there's some changes coming down the road in the type of equipment. And so all those things considered, we'll want to be looking at a policy. Well, let Matt tell us about it, and you can just...
Well, yeah, all those things you said are correct. The part of, with the policy review, we're having it, vetted by certain subject matter experts, and one of them is occupied with other, in terms of our legal analysis of it, to make sure that, we want to reflect something that's accurate legally, that hasn't been able to be reviewed yet and brought to panels. So, for a lot of that, that's one of the major reasons why it's tabled for later, is because we've got to have somebody with the city's perspective of legal eyesight look at it and say, yeah, vet it.
Thank you. It's been over a month, so my memory was failing me. So thanks for bringing that up. We had asked that the legal department review the policy to let us get back to us, and they have not had an opportunity to do that. The city attorney has not. So we will bring that up at the next meeting. And so we're going to move on to civil disputes, and I think this was fairly non-controversial, so I'm going to take a motion from someone to accept the policy as written, or perhaps we'd like to discuss it after we do that.
I move to accept the policy as written.
Okay, motion by Garner, and
I'll second.
seconded by
Garner.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
George Rhodey. Yeah. Okay, we have a motion to approve the policy. We have discussion on the policy itself. Anything that anybody found in here that they'd like to talk about? Joe?
Yeah, under procedures in paragraph 1, it sort of indicates that you're only looking at this if one of the participants is called. What about third parties calling to bring the police into a dispute? In other words, the neighbors call because somebody's going to kill someone.
And the result is we get there and it looks just like a civil matter, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. The policy, he says, it's kind of given just a general parameters. Usually, and in my own experience, generally we come to these because there is some kind of dispute. Usually it's a landlord-tenant dispute, or it's cohabitants, either sexual or just roommate relationship types that are, because of living in the same house or whatever, they're having a dispute, but there's nothing criminal about it. It's, this TV set or this couch is mine or that's mine. And so in terms of policy, it really doesn't matter how we get there. We just have, once we get there and we decide, okay, there's no criminal element to this. What we want to do is just advise the people about preventing.
I guess the point I was trying to make is if you pulled out the phrase, one of the participants either believes, and that it would probably read better. In other words, it's more general. Has escalated to the point that a crime has occurred or will occur. I don't know if that improves it at all, but that just struck me as I read it.
Any further discussion? Anybody else?
On your right.
Tamara?
I think Joe makes a good point. I think it'd be easy enough to just add one of the participants or a third party into that policy, and that would just make it clear that it's a call has been received for service. I think otherwise the policy is cut and dry and fairly short.
Can you make that happen?
Easily.
Okay, we won't need to do any amending then based on that. So I'm ready for a vote. And all those in favor of accept the policy as amended, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Moving into the next section of our agenda, I have some time in here that didn't actually get on the agenda, but I wanted to advise you of what happened. Myself and Jim Garner and James Manning met with the candidates for the police commission that applied for the police commission. There were three. There were Phil Carrasco, Raquel Heck, and William Whalen. We interviewed all of them with the same questions, the standard questions that we've used before. I would like to inform the commission that Philip Carrasco has been appointed to the Human Rights Commission, so he has withdrawn his name from, by fact that he was appointed to that commission, he's withdrawn his name. So we're down to two candidates, Raquel Hecht and William Whalen. And the memo that's enclosed in your package does tell you that between the two of them, there really was not that great of a difference in the total score. It was about close to 6 and 6.4. You know, we're talking tenths of a point. So they were both excellent candidates, and I think we'll be fine. George?
Wasn't Rachel, I think it was Rachel, she's not a resident of, she's not a resident?
She is. It was incorrect on her application. I called to confirm.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yep.
I did notice that.
I think she lives in her office.
Yeah, well, that's what it appeared to be.
That's the
Yeah.
point. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a house
thank you.
over there on this, yeah. So anybody else have any questions about that? Okay, so I just wanted to report, and without objection, that will be sent to council to, with our
Thank you.
findings. Thank you very much. And, yeah, oh, we did, sorry, we also closed the chief's report because of time. We were fearful because of the heavy agenda tonight. And I want to commend all of you for getting us through all that so quickly, because we were able to get everything in. I was kind of worried this was my baptism by fire here. But I thought we can get through this night before 9 o'clock, we'll be doing good. So you guys did great. Thank you very much. We also have included the chief's, usually gives us report, but we've included it in for you to take time to look through it. If you have questions now, feel free to ask. If you have questions, you can bring them next week after you've read over it and have a question about it next month, rather, when we meet. If not, we'll move on to the commissioner's comments and adjournment. Does anybody would like to start out? Jim?
Well, I had quite a few, but I'll kind of keep it limited because I know we've got some time constraints here, at least the one. I'm a numbers person, so I look at a lot of the numbers. I noticed that there was the 14.5% increase in taking calls for service and a 20% increase average for between traffic and person stops that averaged about a 20% increase. Do you have any reasoning behind why those numbers would increase? I mean, what?
Yeah, our data-led policing efforts encourage officers to spend as much time with people in the areas where crimes are occurring. So we're making more arrests, making more contacts with people who are in the neighborhood of crimes, people who we know to be committing crimes. And with the jail situation, we contact the same offenders over and over. They don't stay in jail very long. So that contributes to some of the person stops. And then the traffic stops contribute to that too. To 2013, we've added to our efforts to reduce property crime, we've added reduction of traffic crashes. And our traffic enforcement unit is more active in writing more citations at the intersections where crashes are highest. So those things have added to it. But then when you take out the self-initiated activity that officers make, our calls for service have gone up 13.5%. And we're still trying to understand what's causing that. A small part of it is that animal services now handle calls for service in the police department. So that may contribute to some of it, but definitely not all of it. We're busier now than we've been before.
Tim?
Were you done, Jim? Sorry.
I've got a lot more,
Okay.
but But go ahead, I don't want to talk your time, so.
Chief, thanks for your report. And I was just curious, how many in the police sergeant processes, I said there's 5 candidates selected, how many of them are internal?
All of them.
Oh, all of them are internal, okay. And then my second question is, I couldn't pick it out of the report here, but it was my understanding that burglaries had gone up in the West University neighborhood, and I was wondering if that was true, and if so, if you knew the cause or how that was being addressed.
In my report.
I know, I couldn't pick it out of the report, but I had heard it
Well,
on the news or on the radio, I thought, but I'm not positive about that.
yeah, the numbers change from week to week.
Yeah, and it could have been a couple weeks ago, I probably heard that.
Yeah. And they do,
Okay.
rise and fall, particularly in that neighborhood.
I know there's been a lot of contact and great program there with the students, so I was like, wow, it's up a little bit. It's just surprising because it's generally been, that's not been the case. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else with any questions, or Jeff, you want
Got
to turn
more-
to Jim? Sure.
We've got a little more time.
Sure, we've got time.
In your monthly activity, you have captain process listed.
Mhm.
How's that going? What's going on there?
We have I've promoted Sam Camcar to captain, and that leaves us with 1 vacancy. So now, before we start another process, I'm going to consider a 3-division model on a temporary basis with 2 captains and 1 division manager in charge of tech services. And we'll get that in place to create some stability in the organization, have lieutenants work where the lieutenants normally work, and reduce the number of acting supervisors in the department. And then do more recruitment, more one-on-one recruitment around the country, and then run another process. We actually had very impressive individuals who applied, but just weren't quite the right fit for our department or this community.
Does Captain Camcar's promotion kind of lead to a domino effect? So now there's a position open for him, and then it'll probably, I'm assuming if that got filled internally, then it's going to create the domino.
Yes, we have 4 lieutenant vacancies right now, and we're in the middle of a process for that. And then there are 5 sergeants on a hiring list that will backfill for the lieutenants that are hired, promoted.
And there were a couple things that you had in the news. You know, the 11-year-old that helped the police. Can you elaborate a little more on that? And the other one that I saw was the vehicle crash that led to the 12-pound marijuana seizure. If you could maybe comment on both of those.
There was a shoplifter out at, I believe it was Winco out off of Barger. And he ran from the area, ran from the employees there. He hid in a park. 11-year-old boy saw him where he was hiding. So what happened, coincidentally, the 11-year-old wants to be a police officer someday.
Good start.
And perhaps the only person in the community that thinks meeting the chief of police is the most exciting thing. So, aware of that, 2 officers who worked with this little guy offered a tour of the building, and we gave him a nice T-shirt, some other things. He got to meet the police chief, and we gave him a tour of the building. He was absolutely thrilled beyond. I mean, it was the body language was exquisite. So that's what that's about. And then I'm trying to remember, Sergeant Lowen, do you remember the crash that led to the marijuana seizure?
I'm afraid I don't, sir.
Yeah.
I'm afraid I don't.
Yeah, I wasn't prepared and not aware that we'd be going over this tonight, so sorry about that.
Ask difficult questions.
Anyone, Jim? Pretty good? Okay, Jane was next. And then
Yeah, just real briefly, the ride-along, how often, or what is the frequency for the police commission to go along the ride-along? Do we have to reinitiate the forms?
You know the answer to that? Yeah, I think every time you ride, you have to complete the form, but we can look at another way of doing that if you'd like to ride more often.
Yeah, because it's about time. I'm due for another ride-along, and I think that we as a body and stuff have all committed to doing a ride-along soon, so.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anybody have any, sure, go ahead first.
Can I comment on the ride along? I know, I went on one, I think, the beginning of last month or the end of the month before, and my understanding is that, the policies, you can go quarterly, and then I don't know about the form, but they said you're limited to, I think, 4 times a year. Is what the form said that I remember from about a month and a half ago.
Any more than that, they gotta pay you, so.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, you be on a job then.
Okay, if there's, nobody has anything else, there's one thing that I have to return to, and my apologies, on the agenda about the homeless panel. You got a question?
Well, I want it for the very, very.
Yeah,
end. I want it.
this is something that I would like to go back and revisit on the agenda, and that is the direction that the commission wants to take. I'd asked Carter, be told how we want to deal with the information we received here tonight, and what direction we'd like to go as far as policies and the police department. So anybody want to start that discussion out?
Well, I'll tell you what I'll do if I hear nothing to the contrary.
Okay.
The minutes will include summaries from what the panel spoke about. You'll have that in your packet. You'll also, and that'll probably be in a memo that recaps, because the intent of that panel was to give you information to have your conversation at your October meeting. The packet this time includes policies that to the best of my ability, reflects the policies and laws that most frequently impact people experiencing homelessness. If there are policies missing or things that should be added, then it would be great if you let me know, and we'll make sure that we include that. They're included in this packet so that between now and then you can look at them, and then the thinking is that at the next meeting, based on the information you heard and the information you have here, you're gonna have a conversation about what do you do about it. Are there policy changes you want to be recommending, and changes to the city codes or any of those things. So, and that's a little vague, and it will be unless you give me direction that's clear.
Okay, I saw Tamara's hand first and then James.
I appreciate, Carter, you putting all these things in our packet today. I know that we've discussed and heard perspectives in the past about whether we should be making recommendations or not on park rules, whether as the police commission we should be making recommendations on city ordinances or not. And I think if you look back at our charter and the way that it's written about police resources, preferred policing alternatives, I think that looking at all of those things is within our purview, and making recommendations to the city manager or the city council, as well as to the police department on anything within that set.
Okay, James?
Yeah, real quick. I think that, it was great to hear the panel, their perspective, and I was also a member of Task Force Opportunity Eugene, and heard a number. But I think that one element that is essential that we have not gotten hold of, and that's the actual operator. What does the operator feel as far as the policies that they're conducting? How does that impact or affect the way that they interact with the public? Right now, it's a little skewed because we're only getting one side, and we need to hear both sides before we can actually say that there is a disconnect. From what I understand here, the most other concern here were people that were committing violations. It wasn't about the homeless population, it was about people committing violations. Now, some were homeless, but it's not about homeless, it's about the violations. And I think that we need to listen to the officers that are actually out there on the street and get their side of the story, how that actually is. And perhaps there are some ways there that can jointly bring things together and make sense of, as far as the legal portion, the interaction between the police. Just a recommendation.
Joe?
Yeah, I think a lot of the things that happen in terms of interaction between the police and the homeless is because they don't have a house. I mean, a lot of people in this community drink, a lot of people in this community smoke marijuana, and if you do it in your house, nobody's going to arrest you, nobody's going to give you a ticket, okay? If you sleep in your house, Nobody's gonna arrest you, nobody's gonna give you a ticket. So it's the same activities that go on, except that there's a group of people who are not sheltered by a collection of walls. And so what's happened is their status creates the interactions that the police spend a huge amount of resources interacting with. So since that's part of the underlying reality, we should be looking, okay, at saying, okay, is there a better way for this community to spend its resources than ticketing people who don't have any money?
Okay. Anybody else? James? I'm going to put myself in the queue right after you.
Yeah, well, just as a follow-up to that, I understand, Joe, your perspective, but then we're not here to solve the homeless issue. My understanding is that we are here to look at the policies that they are interacting with people. The underlying causes are great, or even more than what you just cited. So we, as this body, is not trying to solve the homeless issue. We can't do that. But we can get the perspective of the officer. Now, the policies that are designed, many of them are by city code and stuff, so that's a little bit different. You have to get the perspective of the officer in order to get that feedback, in order to have some kind of change, because there is a middle ground, and that's why we need to have the officers come here and find their perspective as well.
If I can respond briefly, I'm absolutely in favor of your suggestion, but I do believe, in addition to that, that how the community interacts or treats the homeless population has a huge impact on the police and the use of resources and all of that. It all comes as a package. And I think that, as Tamara said, it's within our purview to look at that entire picture.
That's what I'm suggesting.
Okay, thank you. And I put myself in the queue, so I'll speak on that just for a moment. You know, my thing, and it was mentioned earlier here, is you violate the law, there should be a sanction. I mean, that's the way our society is built. It's the way we founded it. The Wagoneers came west, and as they established communities, they decided what they thought shouldn't be legal. You know, all the way from murder down the pipe to whatever else it was, and they made a law. And we are governed by a society of laws. We have to live by it. Now, the premise and the logic you're using, Joe, on having a home is faulty, because if I live in a home, I'm not staying in that home 24 hours a day. I'm going out, especially in the evening somewhere, I'm partying, I'm having fun, I'm drinking. If I drink too much out there in the public and I'm violating the law, I hope the police arrest me. If I can't get to a bathroom in time to use the bathroom and I'm urinating in public, I hope the police arrest me. I'm not homeless, but I'm violating the law. And I think it's the behavior. It is not where you live. I really don't believe that the police will look, oh, that's a homeless guy. Let me see if I can find something to tag him with. His eye is drawn to the behavior. If there's a complaint-driven call from someone saying, guy's writing graffiti all over my house, you know, they go there, they respond, they arrest him. If he happens to be homeless, that's a homeless person. If he happens to be housed, and he happens to be out doing that, that happens a lot more. You see more people that are housed going out tagging places than you do people that are homeless, then he should get arrested too. It really shouldn't matter what the status is. And I don't think this is about a class war. I think some people are trying to make it a class war, but I think it's more about whether or not you're going to obey the rules of society that you're going to live in. And yeah, I'm disadvantaged. I'm living out on the street. I don't have a way to get around anymore, and I'm hurting, I'm in pain, whatever, but I still need to stay within the parameters of the law if I can do it, and that's the last thing you should be doing is getting yourself into that situation.
If you pop me on the queue, that'd be great.
Go ahead, we still got time.
Okay. So the issue comes down, let's take sleeping. Okay. If you sleep on public property, there is a camping violation. If you sleep on private property, there is a criminal trespass too. Okay. I have his attention.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's been pointed out that we're beyond time.
Yes.
The 8:30 agenda, was adjourned time.
I'm not.
I'll need a motion to increase time so Joe can have his remarks, or what's the favor of the commission?
I move we extend time by 2 minutes to allow Joe to finish his comments.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, all right.
So, getting back to sleeping, okay? If you sleep on private property, it's criminal trespass too. If you sleep on public property, it's a camping violation, okay? That seems to me like that's all of the possibilities. In other words, if a person who does not have a residence, who hasn't paid somebody to live in a house, sleeps, then the police are automatically put in conflict with that person simply by their mere existence.
Anyone else? We've extended time now, and I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I have one to move.
Wait.
I wanted to thank you, Bob, for your first crack at this. I'm impressed, you did a great job. I wouldn't want to do it, so thank you very much. And Carter, thank you for arranging the
Yes, Carter gets in here.
yeah.
Okay, we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, right.
Sure.
Like, oh, it's Bob's first meeting, ready?
I drink all that.
Please pass your names forward.
I recognize
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, our first time. Yeah, I work really close with Jim. That's connect. So I was like.
I got a sense of how much time
It's an outstanding thing.
I will.
Yeah, we spent some time together.
Yeah, actually, maybe.
I work with Manny for 5 years. They're just not my situation.
So it must have been